The German shepherd, Tara, had spent her entire life protecting and serving. But when the little lynx, Ember, was injured, Tara did the unthinkable to save her. A selfless act. But could Tara protect Ember from the dangers lurking in the world outside? Could their bond withstand all the trials ahead? Or would there be too great a price to pay? There's something special about the mornings in Crescent Hollow, a quiet that feels like the world itself has been slowed down, its pulse softened. Elliot Rayner stepped out onto the moss-covered porch of the cabin, his hands wrapped around a hot cup of coffee, his ears straining for the sounds of the forest. The birds chirped softly, leaves crunched underfoot, and the familiar rhythm of nature, the heartbeat of the wilderness, filled the air, the rhythm that had kept him alive for so many years. Beside him, Tara, a German shepherd who had retired after years of service in the K-9 unit, lay sprawled on the porch steps. Her head rested on her front paws, ears twitching at every sound. Her legs, once strong and swift, now bore the marks of time, her fur ragged but her eyes still sharp, alert. The two of them, silent companions through the years, had come to understand each other without words. It was as simple as a glance, or a sudden stop in their walk. That morning, Tara wasn't as energetic as usual. She moved more slowly, a quiet drift through the trees, sniffing the roots and the earth, her movements soft and deliberate. Elliot thought it was just the trace of a hunting instinct still lingering in her old bones. He let her wander, setting his coffee cup down on the wooden step and reaching for the leash and flashlight, preparing for a gentle walk, like they always had. But what Elliot didn't expect was how long Tara stayed gone without returning. At first, he called her name, as he always did. His voice echoed through the wet, misty trees, fading away into the quiet of the woods. He followed the familiar path, the one where Tara would often wander, nose to the ground, following the old scents. But this time, there were no new tracks, no rustling in the bushes, no quick, heavy breaths that he knew so well. The birds fell silent as he approached, only to start singing again behind him, as though saying goodbye. Elliot gripped the leash in his hand tightly, as though holding on to the fragile connection he had left with Tara. As the sun rose higher, he ventured deeper into the forest, into places he'd promised himself he wouldn't go without Tara by his side. Moss covered the rocks thickly. The trail was lost beneath layers of decaying leaves. Elliot stopped in a sunlit clearing, calling again, his voice breaking the silence. No answer. Just quiet. Memories flooded back. The first time Tara had disappeared during training had sent him into a panic so deep that he nearly collapsed. But this time was different. There was no rescue team, no comrades, just an old man and the emptiness that stretched out with every step. As the afternoon wore on, the light slanted across the trunks of ancient trees. Elliot slowly turned back toward the cabin. His shadow stretched long on the grassy path. The wind whispered through the leaves, sending a shiver down his spine. Every rustle, every falling leaf made him jump. When he pushed open the door to the cabin, everything seemed to collapse. The food bowl still full, Tara's blanket still flat on the floor. Nothing had changed. Nothing at all. But Tara was gone. And the silence that followed was deafening. It was just before dawn when Elliot heard it, the faint scratching sound on the wooden steps. At first he wasn't sure if it was real, if his mind was playing tricks on him. But then it came again. Soft, deliberate. He jumped up, heart racing, and hurried to the door, and there, on the porch, stood Tara, covered in mud, her fur sticking up in every direction, exhausted beyond measure. But what made Elliot freeze was what she was holding in her mouth. A baby lynx, its tiny body soaked in blood, one of its back legs still caught in an iron trap. Tara wasn't holding it by the neck, like a dog would with prey. She was carefully gripping the trap itself, as if she was cradling it, holding it with a care so chilling it almost felt unnatural. Elliot knelt down, hand shaking, and gently pried the trap open. The lynx's breaths were weak, its eyes tightly shut in pain. Tara sat beside it, her gaze never leaving the little creature. Not a growl, not an instinctual reaction, just presence, solid, unwavering. Without a word, Elliot grabbed an old towel, wrapping the lynx up gently, and laid it on the rug in front of the fire. Tara lay down beside it, resting her head on the edge of the blanket, as still and silent as a soldier on guard. Outside, the drizzle began to fall, soft and steady, as if the world was holding its breath along with him. Elliot sat down beside the fire, eyes fixed on the two creatures in front of him. A voice, old and familiar, echoed in his mind. Never forget. A dog is loyal. But sometimes, they are something more. He looked at Tara, then at the little lynx, its tiny body still and fragile. He whispered to himself, almost as if trying to convince his own heart, I wonder if it's fate, that a lynx found its way to my doorstep, through the way Tara brought it here, so gently, as if she understood its pain. He repeated the thought quietly to himself, as he squatted beside a makeshift wooden crate he'd prepared, lining it with an old quilt. The box was made from leftover pallets, nails hammered in, and rope tied around the edges, not to trap, but to keep the creature inside from panicking. He didn't have the right cage, didn't have experience with wild animals. But what he had was time, patience, and a German shepherd lying motionless, like a statue, beside the rug. Tara never took her eyes off the lynx. The lynx curled into a small ball, its blood dried and caked on its leg, eyes wide open, the black of its pupils spreading across most of the irises. It didn't growl, didn't make the usual hissing noise of a big cat. It just lay there, like a ragged bundle of cloth still fighting to breathe. Elliot took a white ceramic bowl, filled it with warm water, and placed it beside the crate. He didn't force it to drink. He simply nudged the bowl gently closer with a thin wooden stick. The lynx flicked its eyes toward him, its ears twitching ever so slightly, before it fell still again. We won't make you scared anymore, Elliot whispered, knowing full well the lynx wouldn't understand him. But Tara seemed to. She slowly stood up, walked closer to the crate, then paused just a step away, before gently lying down. Every movement she made was calculated, no wasted noise, no hurried action. Elliot watched the scene unfold, feeling like there was a new kind of language in the cabin, one he couldn't quite read yet, but felt deep inside. He stood up and reached for the wall-mounted phone, an old cream-colored device that still worked well, thanks to an independent line he'd once installed himself. He dialed the Ridgepoint Wildlife Center, the nearest place he knew that cared for wild animals. 3 rings, then 4. No one answered. He left a message. Hello, this is Elliot Rayner, from the southern edge of Crescent Hollow. I've just brought in a young lynx. It got caught in a steel trap. It looks really weak. Blood's dried all over one leg, and I suspect an infection. I'm not sure what to do. Please call me back soon. I keep this line open. When he hung up the receiver, Elliot let out a long sigh. He turned to the window. Outside, the sunlight pierced through the trees, casting long streaks of light across the wooden floor. Tara was still there, lying quietly, and the lynx, the little creature still drenched in blood, hadn't moved. But there was something in its eyes that had softened, just a little, as if it knew that here there would be no growls, no chains, no guns. Elliot stood there, staring at the two of them, before stepping outside to gather more firewood for the stove. He thought to himself, maybe tonight will be cold. But he knew. It probably wasn't the weather. It was the strange, fragile distance that had appeared in his own home, between a man, a dog, and a creature from a world that had no name. A place where no one ever called out its name. For the next 2 days, Elliot spent most of his time just watching. Watching as the lynx, Ember as he called her, grew weaker, and as Tara, no longer in active service, guarded her like she was still on duty. Tara didn't leave the edge of the crate. Every time Ember shifted, Tara would rise, eyes fixed on her, not growling, not barking, not even asking for food. There was no tension between the two creatures from entirely different worlds. Elliot had seen Tara chase a fox just because it lingered near the neighbor's chicken coop. He had witnessed her growl when she smelled the scent of an injured fawn. Her canine instincts were still there, maybe even sharper than when she was still in active duty. But now, Tara had shed all of those reflexes, replacing them with an eerie, quiet patience. As for Ember, what surprised Elliot the most wasn't just her resilience. It was the way she looked at him, those eyes. They weren't the eyes of a wild animal in pain. They weren't the eyes of something near death. They were observant eyes, cautious but not hostile, defensive but not aggressive. Whenever Tara moved, whether standing or shifting her position, Ember would tilt her head, following her every movement. No growls, no frantic reactions, just calm, silent observation. One early morning, after Elliot had brewed his coffee and turned his back for just a moment, he suddenly heard a faint hiss. Turning around, he saw Tara lying flat, her head resting on her front legs, her body perfectly still. The lynx's eyes were half closed, dimming with each shallow breath. And then, without warning, Ember, without any visible sign of fear or aggression, crawled to the edge of the crate. Slowly, cautiously, she stretched her small, trembling body out toward Tara, carefully reaching with her tongue to lick the edge of Tara's ear. Elliot froze. His hand hovered mid-air, the breath in his lungs held captive for a few seconds. That wasn't the behavior of a wild animal. It wasn't the instinct for survival. No, this action was too gentle, too human. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene until Ember, having completed her soft gesture, curled back into her small space. Tara remained unmoving, her breathing slow and steady. Perhaps she had known. Perhaps she had felt it. Elliot sat down in a chair, his coffee long gone cold. But the strangest realization hit him. He, the one who had saved this lynx, who had bandaged it, fed it, and placed it in the crate, was the only one in the cabin who had no connection to it. No animosity, no kinship, just a third party. And that realization sent a chill down his spine. Not fear. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite explain, but he knew. This was different. It was real, so undeniably real that it left him confused, unsure of how everything had unfolded this way. That afternoon, as Elliot changed the towel lining inside the wooden crate, he gave the lynx a name. Not because he wanted to, but because he realized he couldn't keep calling it this thing or the animal any longer. He looked into its eyes, the deep amber tinged with light brown, the color of still burning embers, like smoldering ash not yet gone cold. Ember, he murmured. And the moment the name left his lips, it seemed like the cabin itself took on a new heartbeat, a subtle shift in the air, as though the room had grown fuller with meaning. Ember still hadn't touched the food Elliot had set out. He'd tried placing meat closer to her, tried warming it up, tried offering broth, even sugar water, but nothing stirred Ember. It wasn't until Tara came closer and lay down next to the crate that something changed. At first it was just a slight movement, a soft lift of Tara's head. Then, Ember sniffed the air, cautiously nudging her nose toward the bowl. Tara didn't do anything. She lay still, tail not wagging, ears slightly drooping, deliberately not making any move that might be interpreted as a threat. 15 minutes passed, and Ember slowly began to lick at the food. Slowly, but steadily. Elliot watched from a distance, a strange mixture of relief and confusion stirring inside him. Part of him felt lighter, glad that at least Ember was eating, but another part of him felt a tightness in his chest, because none of the methods he'd tried had worked, not until Tara stepped in. The next day, Elliot tried sitting closer. He pulled a small chair, placing it a few feet away from the crate, staying still, saying nothing. Ember didn't eat. Her head was low, eyes wide open, ears flattened in quiet distress. When Elliot shifted in his chair, Elliot leaned in closer, his body tensing, but Ember let out a low growl. It wasn't loud, but it was enough for him to understand. The boundary wasn't yet broken. What surprised him more was the way Tara turned her head and glanced at him. It wasn't a look of reproach nor a warning, just a brief glance. Then she looked away, almost as if saying, "Don't push." Elliot stepped back, sitting down in a wooden chair by the stove, setting his coffee cup on the table. He looked at the two creatures, one lying still, eyes half closed, and the other quietly chewing small pieces of meat. And then, he gently ran his hand over Tara's head and whispered with a soft smile, "Maybe you've got yourself a new friend now, huh?" The next day, everything remained almost the same. Ember still didn't react when Elliot got closer. Tara remained by the edge of the crate, standing guard, never straying far. Elliot cleaned the crate, changed the towel, refilled the water. He was beginning to adapt to the new rhythm of life in the cabin. The smallest noise from the crate had him instinctively turning his head. But by the third afternoon, everything began to change. Ember refused to eat. At first, Elliot thought maybe she was full, but by the next meal, the bowl of meat was still untouched. The following morning, the bowl of water remained undisturbed. Ember lay curled up, her body trembling slightly. Her belly rose and fell rapidly, but her ears were flat, no longer perking up like they usually did when Tara approached. Her eyes had become dry and clouded, no longer reacting when Tara moved. Elliot bent closer, careful not to startle her. He saw the wound on Ember's hind leg. The one that had been trapped in the steel snare was now changing color. The area around it had swollen, and yellowish liquid was oozing from the edges. It was clearly infected. A fresh drop of blood slowly trickled from the edge of the wound. "Damn it!" Elliot stepped back, his breath coming faster. He grabbed the landline, dialing the Ridgepoint Wildlife Center again. The line was busy. He tried again, still busy. He called 3 more times before stopping, his heart sinking. Elliot glanced around the cabin, his eyes landing on his personal first aid kit, just bandages, human antiseptic, some paracetamol, and a few expired antibiotics. Nothing suitable for a young lynx. He grabbed a clean towel, wet it with cool water, wrung it out carefully, and gently pressed it to Ember's forehead and chest. At first she flinched, but then she went still. Her body trembled, and her breath was labored, each inhale wheezing like something was caught in her throat. "Hang in there. Just make it through the night, Ember," Elliot whispered, his hands trembling as he wiped the dried pus from around her eyes. He pulled a few small ice cubes from the fridge, wrapping them in the towel to try and bring her fever down. Tara stayed close, never taking her eyes off the lynx. Throughout the evening, she didn't eat, didn't sleep, just sat quietly. Her gaze was fixed on Ember, and every now and then she would lean forward and lick the lynx's ear, as if it was a protective instinct she couldn't shed. In the quiet of the cabin, as the night grew colder and the wind whispered through the trees, Elliot watched them both. Tara, still a soldier, even in retirement, stood guard, and Ember, so small and fragile, fought to breathe. The cabin, once filled with just the hum of everyday life, now seemed alive with the weight of something deeper, something that neither man nor animal could explain, but all of them could feel. Elliot stared at the scene, his heart in turmoil. He silently berated himself for not having found the proper medicine sooner, for not being able to decide whether to inject Ember or take her to the wildlife center, especially with the strict conservation laws regarding wild animals. But in that moment, as the wind howled outside the cracks of the door, the fire in the stove dying down to a mere smolder, and Ember's breathing growing heavier, Elliot knew tonight would be the longest one he'd ever spent in this cabin. And he wasn't sure if they would all wake up in the morning. He pulled his chair closer, no more than an arm's length away from the crate. The cold towel on Ember's forehead had warmed, so he replaced it with another. Ember's shallow breaths mixed with soft, pitiful moans, not the cries of an animal in pain, but a sound that came from deep in her throat, as though she had no strength left to even feel it. Tara lay right next to her, her head resting on her front legs, her eyes wide open and never blinking. There was nothing in her gaze now but absolute focus. Elliot ran his hand gently down Tara's back. For the first time, the dog didn't react. Elliot was about to speak, but his eyelids felt heavy. Nearly 2 sleepless nights, the stress and worry draining him completely. He slouched in the chair, intending to rest his eyes for just a few minutes. But those minutes stretched on far too long. When Elliot suddenly woke, the light outside was dim and gray. The fire was out. The room had grown noticeably colder. He rushed to the crate. Ember was still there, breathing faintly, but still alive. The towel was completely dry now. But Tara was no longer in the cabin. Elliot called out, rushing to the door. No footsteps, no trace. He ran to the porch, eyes scanning the edge of the forest. No barking, not even the faintest rustle in the air. The leash still hung on the hook. His grip tightened around the doorframe, his heart racing. And then there was a knock. Not the soft scratch of Tara's claws. This was real. 3 distinct knocks. Elliot whipped around, his heart nearly choking him. A girl stood at the door, her hair tied back neatly, a thin jacket draped over a light blue nurse's uniform, her feet still caught in a few strands of grass. Elliot opened the door, stunned by the sight of her. She spoke first, her breath still uneven. "Sorry, I'm June. I work at the Ridgepoint Veterinary Station." Elliot blinked, still trying to make sense of it. What are you doing here?" June awkwardly scratched the back of her head, pointing behind her. "Actually, I'm not sure. There was a dog. It pulled at my jacket, wouldn't let go. At first I thought it was lost, and I was going to take it into the station. But it kept pulling me along." She pointed toward the forest trail. "It led me through the woods, took a left, then circled around a small hill, and walked straight here." Elliot squinted, his voice lowering. "The dog, dark gray fur, ears slightly drooping. Is that right?" June nodded. "Yes. Strong. Didn't bark, didn't growl, just pulled me with purpose." At that moment, from behind her, a familiar figure appeared. Elliot let out a breath of relief. "Tara!" Her fur was caked with mud, her muzzle marked with a few small scratches. She was breathing heavily, but her tail wagged lightly. One of her legs showed signs of bleeding. She stood there, looking at Elliot without blinking. Elliot couldn't find his words. He dropped to his knees in front of Tara, reaching out to gently stroke her head. Tara leaned forward, letting out a long sigh. You brought her here? Elliot whispered. Tara didn't answer. She just stepped forward, lying down next to the wooden crate as if she had never left. June stepped inside, and before she could even take off her shoes, she knelt by the crate. She leaned in close, pressing her hand gently against Ember's chest, then looked up and nodded slightly at Elliot. She still has a pulse. Weak, but it's there. Thank God. Elliot nodded, his voice rough from the lack of sleep. I've been worried since last night. She had a high fever, weak breaths. I didn't have any medicine, just used cold towels to try and help. June opened her canvas bag, pulling out a small, amber-colored bottle and a syringe. Lucky I brought this. It's a light dose of antibiotics for wildcats. I'll inject it into the muscle. If her body reacts well, she might be able to pull through. She worked quickly but carefully. As the needle withdrew, Ember only twitched slightly, then settled back down, her breathing still labored but more regular. Tara remained close, lying beside the crate, eyes locked on June's hands. Elliot watched the scene in silence, his heart heavy. He gently gripped the cold coffee cup in his hands, then spoke softly. Are you telling me Tara really led you here? June looked up, a small laugh escaping her lips, as if even she couldn't fully believe it herself. It's true. I was at the station, organizing some medications when I heard scratching at the door. I opened it, and there she was. No barking, no scratching, just staring at me. Then she grabbed my sleeve and tugged gently. Elliot furrowed his brows, whispering, She grabbed your sleeve and pulled? June nodded. Yeah. At first I thought she was lost or needed help, so I followed her. But she just kept pulling me, straight out of the station, through the trails, around a small hill, and all the way here. She glanced around the wooden cabin. I've never been here before, but she led me straight here without hesitation. Elliot looked at Tara, the dog still lying silently by the crate, her eyes never leaving Ember. He crouched down and gently placed a hand on her back, his voice softening. You didn't bring the medicine. You went to find someone who knew what to do. Tara shifted slightly, then gently licked Ember's forehead. Elliot looked up, his eyes momentarily glistening. June stood up, her voice calm and steady. I'll stay for a few more hours, monitor her. If her fever goes down and her breathing stabilizes, she'll be okay. Otherwise, I'll contact the station for additional support. Elliot nodded, his voice thick with gratitude. Thank you, really, thank you. He moved toward the stove, rekindling the fire and heating some water. When he returned, he saw June checking Ember's temperature again. She's better, she said. The fever's down a little. Her body's responding to the medicine. Elliot let out a long breath. He sat down in a chair near the stove, his eyes drifting to the crate where Tara had curled up beside Ember, like a silent guardian. June poured herself a cup of ginger tea, sitting down across from him. You know, I always thought animals acted on instinct, but today, it feels different. Elliot gave a small nod and smiled. I used to think that too, until I started living with this little guy. He leaned down and gently stroked Tara's back, whispering softly, Thank you for not turning away. Tara stretched her neck, gently resting her head on his knee. Just for a moment. But it was enough to make Elliot sigh deeply, biting his lip as if trying to hold back something that welled up inside him. Because he knew. Today, Tara hadn't just saved a life. She had brought something back into this home and into his life that he never thought he'd have again. Hope. June sat across from him at the wooden dining table. Ember lay on a thick towel, her eyes closed, though her ears still twitched occasionally. Tara lay right next to her, head resting on the edge of the crate, her breathing steady. June took a sip of tea, then set her cup down. "I need to be clear about something, Elliot," she said softly but firmly. "I know today's event is a good thing, but you need to be cautious about letting the lynx get too attached to people, or to Tara. If it bonds with humans, it'll be much harder to release it back into the wild later." Elliot nodded slowly, his gaze still on Tara. "I understand, it's just, if I separate them now, I'm not sure she'll make it through the night." June nodded slowly in agreement. "I understand, but you also need to prepare yourself. If it imprints on Tara, or worse, on you, then there's no chance of it returning to nature." Elliot sat in silence. He placed his hand on the coffee cup, but didn't drink. His mind was a whirlwind, right and wrong, principles, what to do. But then his gaze shifted to the two creatures before him, one a dog that had saved countless lives, and the other a little lynx barely hanging on. "I only know," Elliot spoke slowly. "She eats when Tara's beside her. Nothing else works." June leaned back in her chair, her voice softer now. "I'm not blaming you. I just wanted to say, later, when the time comes to let go, it'll be harder than you think." That night, Elliot sat alone in the small room, the glow from the stove dancing on the wooden walls. He powered on the small screen connected to the security camera in the corner of the house. On the screen, the familiar sight he never grew tired of. Ember curled up, her head resting against Tara's neck. And Tara lying quietly, her body completely still, as though afraid to disturb something fragile. No one taught them to do this. No one made them. But the way they lay so close to one another, like they'd always known they needed each other to survive, it was something only they could understand. Elliot turned off the screen and walked slowly over to where Tara and Ember slept. He sat down beside them and gently stroked Tara's back. The dog turned her head, gave him a brief glance, then closed her eyes. "They say you shouldn't let it get used to humans," Elliot whispered. "But I think what it needs is just to be close to someone, not some theory." Outside, the wind started to pick up. Elliot looked around the house. Everything seemed the same, but he knew. Ever since Tara had brought that tiny creature into the house, the line between nature and humanity had blurred. And maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. The next morning, just like every other day, Elliot brought a tray of food over to the crate. Ember lay still, her eyes barely open. Tara was still by her side, ears perked up as she saw Elliot approach. As Elliot opened the crate, Tara stood up. No barking, just a low growl, deep, just enough to make him stop. "What is it, Tara?" Elliot froze, his voice quiet. Tara stepped forward, blocking the entrance. At the same moment, Ember let out a sharp hiss, backing into the corner of the crate, eyes fixed on him. Elliot slowly backed away. Okay. "I get it," he said, placing the tray on the ground. Tara still watched him. But when she saw he'd stepped back enough, she turned and gently licked Ember's ear. Ember's breathing slowed, and she lay back down. Not long after, June entered, taking off her knitted hat, her hair messy from the wind. "Did the Wildlife Center call back?" she asked as she stepped inside. Elliot shook his head. "No one picked up. I left 2 messages." She stepped closer to the crate, eyeing Tara and Ember before turning to Elliot. "Is something wrong? You look tense." Elliot nodded toward Tara. "Earlier, I went to give them some food." Tara blocked me, just a low growl, but it was clear. June sat down, thinking for a moment before speaking. "I think I was wrong about something." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Wrong about what?" She glanced at the two animals, then answered quietly. I thought it was just an injured lynx. Help it heal, then release it back into the wild, and that'd be the end. But it seems like it doesn't need me. It doesn't need you. It needs Tara. Elliot gave a slight nod, his gaze still fixed on Tara lying next to Ember. June exhaled slowly. Tara's protecting it, in a way that doesn't seem like a dog. Elliot let out a quiet, half-hearted smile, his voice low. Yeah, I thought the same. They both sat in silence for a moment. Then Elliot mumbled, more to himself than to her. I used to think they were just two animals, but looking at them now, I'm not so sure anymore. That morning the wind was still, but Elliot felt a restless unease stirring in his stomach. As he bent down to change Ember's water, a faint knock echoed from the porch. Tara immediately stood, a low growl rumbling from her chest, and stepped forward. Elliot followed behind, opening the door. A middle-aged man stood before him, wearing a low-brimmed baseball cap, camouflage jacket, and hiking boots covered in mud. He smiled faintly, pointing toward the trail behind the cabin. My car broke down on the road, he said. Can I get some water? Elliot nodded cautiously. Sure. Wait a minute. He turned inside to grab the water, but as he did, he noticed the man's footsteps were pacing outside. Through the crack of the door, Elliot saw him glancing around, his eyes lingering at the corner of the crate, where Ember lay. As Elliot reached for the water jug, the man silently stepped closer to the crate. No words, no knocking, no asking for permission. Ember's hiss was the first sound to break the tension. The little lynx shot out of the crate, no warning, no hesitation. The man didn't even have time to react before Ember's sharp claws sank into his wrist. Ah! He screamed, falling to the ground and rolling over to push Ember off. One of his gloves slipped off, and a small cloth bag fell from his hand. Tara's growl echoed behind him, and the man froze, then quickly scrambled to his feet, running back toward the trail. Elliot slammed the door shut. He looked through the small window pane, watching as the man disappeared into the distance. Then he hurried outside to gather what had fallen. A black leather glove, torn and ragged, and the small cloth bag with a simple rope tied around it. He opened the bag. Inside, there was a GPS tracker, an unused syringe, and a small triangular metal tag. Etched on the tag was EX079. Elliot clenched the tag in his hand. Sitting down on the porch step, he stared at it, his gaze distant. This wasn't random. This wasn't some passerby. The man knew Ember was here, and he hadn't come for water. June arrived not long after, still in her thin coat and muddy boots. Elliot handed her the bag. Take a look at this for me. These things, they don't seem like something a person would carry to ask for water. June opened the bag, her brow furrowing. This. She picked up the metal tag, flipping it over. It's an identification tag, used in illegal wildlife transport. The number is for individual identification. I saw this last year during a lynx rescue operation. Elliot pointed to the small device. What about this? A GPS tracker. The kind you can hide easily. It's small, easy to conceal, easy to track, and the syringe... She paused, opening it to examine. It's tranquilizer. Inject it, and the animal's out cold in under 5 minutes. Elliot sat in silence, his eyes distant, absorbing the weight of what June had said. Tell me everything from the beginning, June said, her voice steady. What exactly happened? He came by, said his car broke down, asked for water, but his eyes never left the crate. I turned away for a moment and he walked straight up to it. No asking, no talking. Lucky for us, Ember reacted fast. June sat on the edge of the chair. quiet for a moment, taking it all in. June stepped closer to the crate, her eyes shifting between Tara and Ember before turning to Elliot. "Something wrong?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. "You look tense." Elliot nodded toward Tara. "Earlier I tried to feed them. Tara blocked me. Just a low growl, but it was clear." June sat down, thinking for a moment before speaking. "I think I was wrong about something." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Wrong about what?" She glanced at the two animals, then replied quietly. "I thought it was just an injured lynx. Help it heal, then release it back into the wild, and that would be that, but it seems like it doesn't need me. It doesn't need you. It needs Tara." Elliot gave a small nod, his eyes still fixed on Tara, lying beside Ember. June exhaled slowly. "Tara's protecting it, in a way that doesn't seem like a dog." Elliot let out a quiet smile, his voice deepening. "Yeah, I thought the same." They both sat in silence for a moment, then Elliot murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "I used to think they were just two animals. But now, I'm not so sure anymore." That evening, Elliot sat alone in the small room, the light from the stove flickering against the wooden walls. He opened the old laptop, typing a few words into the search bar. After a few minutes, he pointed at the screen. "Clayton Moore, arrested last year for keeping 3 lynxes in the back of his truck. I knew the moment I saw his hat and face." June nodded. "That sounds about right. People like him tend to hide out in forested areas like this." Elliot rested his hands on the table, his voice heavy. This is beyond me now. At first, I thought I was just saving an animal. But now it's about saving a life from being hunted," June finished for him. Elliot turned to look at her. "What do you think I should do?" June glanced at Ember, still lying in the crate, her eyes staring out the door as if she still couldn't believe the man had left. "Stay calm, but be ready in case he comes back." Elliot nodded, then said slowly, "This house, it's not a safe place anymore." June took a few steps back, looking at Elliot, who stood still on the porch, still holding the metal tag. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, her voice soft but deliberate. Elliot nodded slightly, his eyes still on the forest. "I'm fine. It's just, things are moving faster than I thought." June exhaled deeply. "People like him don't show up just out of curiosity. He knows the lynx is here, and he has a reason for wanting to take it." "Yeah," Elliot nodded. "At first I thought it was just a coincidence, but now I don't think that anymore." June pointed to the objects on the table, the GPS tracker, the syringe, the metal tag. "Keep all of this. If anything happens, at least you'll have proof." Elliot bit his lip, nodding slowly. June adjusted her backpack and moved toward the door. "If you need anything, just call. Don't hesitate. The signal's weak here, but I'll check the phone regularly." He looked at her. "Thank you, June. Truly." She nodded, hand on the doorknob, then turned back to him. "Oh, and one more thing." "Huh?" "Stay calm, but also, be prepared in case he comes back again." Elliot took a deep breath. "Yeah, I know." She stepped outside, the wooden door clicking shut behind her, the sound of her car engine starting and fading into the distance. Elliot stayed standing there for a moment, his hand still resting on the doorknob. He then turned back inside, letting out a long breath. "Damn it," he muttered. "This quiet place, now it feels like a battlefield." Tara looked up from where she lay, not barking, just blinking slowly. Ember remained in the crate, eyes open, ears alert, like a radar scanning for any movement. Elliot moved to the stove, poured more hot water into the teapot, and sat down in the chair. He didn't look at anyone, just stared at the fire that burned low. "Tara," he said softly, "I don't know what we're really holding on to here, but I know someone is willing to do anything to take it away." Tara didn't move, but her tail gave a soft thump on the floor, as though she understood something. He didn't say more, because he knew. Some things don't need names, but when threatened, the fear inevitably takes shape. The next morning, when he checked the cabin's camera, Elliot saw a strange sequence of events. Ember quietly crept closer to Tara. But what was strange was that Tara didn't move. She lay on her side, breathing lightly, as if she were asleep. Her hind legs stretched out, and her neck slightly turned, just like a dog caught off guard would lie. Ember didn't attack. She moved slowly, stopped, then lifted her head and gently placed her front paw on Tara's neck. No force, no clawing, just a touch. Then Tara gently rolled over, not suddenly, as though playing with Ember, or maybe teaching Ember how to react. Elliot rewound the video 3 times. Each time, he noticed more small details. Ember always kept low, always moving behind Tara's shoulder, the blind spot for most predators. June stepped closer to the crate, watching Tara and Ember before turning back to Elliot. "Something's going on, isn't it?" she asked softly, noticing the tension in his posture. Elliot nodded toward Tara. "Earlier, I tried to feed them. Tara stopped me." Just a low growl, but it was clear. June sat down, pausing for a moment before speaking again. "I think I've been wrong about something." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Wrong about what?" She glanced at the 2 animals, then responded quietly, "I thought it was just an injured lynx. Help it heal, then let it go. But it seems like it doesn't need me. It doesn't need you. It needs Tara." Elliot nodded slowly, his eyes still locked on Tara, who lay next to Ember. June exhaled slowly. Tara's protecting her, in a way that doesn't seem like a dog. Elliot let out a small, wry smile, his voice deepening. "Yeah, I thought the same." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elliot mumbled, almost to himself, "I used to think they were just 2 animals. But now, I'm not so sure anymore." On the 3rd morning, Elliot decided to observe directly. He sat behind the kitchen curtain, the lights off. The day hadn't fully dawned yet, the only light coming from the faint glow through the large window. Once again, Ember approached Tara. The movement was the same, the steps soft, her feet barely making a sound. As she came within a few feet of Tara, she stopped and tilted her head. Tara inhaled lightly, then turned her head away, exposing her neck. Ember gently touched Tara's leg. Then she pulled back. No harm, just a lesson. Elliot exhaled, barely a whisper escaping his lips. "They're training." He remembered his time with the K9 unit, simulated attack drills, teaching dogs to distinguish between real threats. It all took time, repetition. But this, no one was instructing. No leash, no whistle, just 2 creatures, one once a soldier, the other once prey, now playing a game with no name. That evening, Elliot recorded the entire footage, saving it on a separate hard drive. He didn't plan to share it with anyone, but he knew this wasn't just a game. After dinner, he sat beside the stove. Tara lay next to the chair. Ember curled up in the corner by the fire, her eyes still open. "Tara," he whispered, "what are you teaching her?" Tara didn't respond, but Elliot didn't need an answer. He knew. With a dog who had been through real combat training, There was no such thing as a pointless action. And if a lynx could learn, then it meant she was preparing for something. Or someone. The next morning, when June came to check on Ember's wounds, Elliot didn't immediately let her in. Instead, he gestured for her to stop by the window and gently pulled the curtain aside. Look. Ember was once again approaching Tara, but this time from a different angle, her body low, tail tucked, each step light. Tara lay on her side, eyes half open, breathing steady, not asleep, but not resisting. A perfect approach if it were real combat. As Ember raised her paw to feign an attack, Tara suddenly rolled, nudging her shoulder lightly, causing Ember to miss. The two paused, then repeated the sequence again. June whispered, "Are they practicing?" Elliot nodded, eyes still on the scene. "I've been watching since 3 days ago." June tilted her head, studying the two carefully. This isn't a lynx's natural behavior. It doesn't hunt like that. The way it lowers its body, keeps its center of balance, observes the blind spots. Ember's learning. Elliot answered softly. From a dog. A dog who's been trained? June looked at him, her gaze intense, the soft light from the window reflecting in her eyes. Are you sure? Elliot stayed quiet for a moment, then pointed to the video saved on the computer. Watch it a few times and you'll understand. This isn't play. This is skill transfer. She leaned in, watching intently. After a long pause, she said, "This is almost impossible. Dogs learn through commands. Cats learn through imitation. But this, learning between two species without rewards or a trainer, this is the first time I've seen it." Elliot nodded, his gaze still focused on the two animals outside. Because Tara was never a pet. She was a partner. And Ember, she's not learning how to live. She's learning how to survive. June leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, her voice thoughtful. Why do you think she needs to learn that? Elliot was silent for a moment, then softly replied, because she knows the world outside isn't kind. They looked at each other. Neither said another word. A little while later, Tara entered the house and sat by Elliot's feet. Ember followed, no longer the frightened creature from before, now quietly sitting a few feet away. June watched the scene, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. I once told you not to let that lynx imprint on a human." Elliot let out a small laugh, his eyes never leaving the two creatures. "She didn't imprint on a human. She imprinted on a dog, one who knows how to live like a human." June shook her head. "I guess I was wrong from the start." Elliot smiled lightly. "We all were. But the good thing is, some things don't need to be right to save someone." June leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her voice thoughtful. "Do you really think they're practicing, not just playing anymore?" Elliot kept his eyes on the backyard. "Yeah, I think so. She's not biting hard, just testing, then pulling back. It's like she's calculating." June looked over at him. "That lynx didn't learn this from instinct. This isn't wild behavior. She's learning from someone." Elliot nodded slowly, his voice dropping. "From Tara. That dog. She was trained well." June raised an eyebrow, stepping back slightly to observe more closely. "Tara's a K9, right?" "Yeah. Worked with a rescue unit for nearly 6 years. Then an injury, retired. Came back here with me." June sat quietly for a moment before shaking her head. "And now she's teaching a lynx. That's hard to believe." Elliot exhaled, half smiling. "I thought the same at first. But when I kept watching, it became clear. Tara lies down, pretending to be still. Ember steps closer, testing the vulnerable spots. There's no clumsiness here. June let out a soft laugh. It's like they're sparring. But from a dog teaching a wildcat? Can you believe that? Elliot shrugged. Guess I have to now. I live with them every day. June looked back at the two animals. Tara had sat up, and Ember was quietly creeping around her, trying to find an opening. I guess I need to change my perspective. I always thought animals acted purely on instinct. Elliot turned to her, taking a sip of his now cold coffee. Maybe it's instinct, but instinct also knows how to learn from what it trusts. June nodded slowly, her voice softer. This lynx, she's not just learning how to live, she's learning how to defend herself. She knows there's something out there waiting. Elliot leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the window. Yeah, and I think Tara is being reminded of things she thought she'd forgotten. June smiled gently. They're healing each other, in their own way. Elliot nodded, silent for a moment. Because sometimes, just sitting quietly is enough to understand. That night, after the lights in the cabin had gone out, only the moonlight filtered softly through the window. Elliot stepped out onto the wooden porch. The world outside was still, the only sound the wind rustling through the old trees. The moon cast pale light across the yard, creating long shadows on the ground. The fire in the stove had long since died, leaving the room cold. Now he couldn't hear any wildlife sounds or the usual noises of the outdoors, only the faint echo of his own footsteps in the quiet. When Elliot reached the porch, his eyes narrowed at the sight before him. Tara and Ember were lying next to each other. Tara's back was turned, but Ember was curled up beside her, her tail almost touching Tara's. Neither of them moved, just lying there, breathing steadily in the stillness of the night. Elliot stood there for a long while, holding his jacket, feeling the quiet bond between the two creatures. No words were needed, no clear signs, just the way they lay close, without invading each other's space. He could feel something in the air. I thought I was just saving a kitten, Elliot whispered, his voice low and tired. A wild lynx, a creature he had brought in to care for, to give it a chance to survive. But now he realized that what he was witnessing wasn't just a simple act of rescue. It was a relationship forming, not through words, but through actions, through respect, without the need for any language. Elliot looked at the moonlight reflecting on the ground, his eyes starting to blur. Maybe it was the fatigue that had built up over time, or maybe it was because what he was seeing before him felt too special. He couldn't name the relationship between Tara and Ember. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't just protection or dependence. But in the stillness of the night, with the soft moonlight casting shadows, he understood one thing clearly. These two creatures didn't need fancy words or definitions. They were living, learning how to survive, and protecting each other. Elliot sat down on a wooden chair on the porch, the world around him completely quiet, the only sound the wind rustling through the leaves. Tara and Ember lay side by side, no interruptions in the space between them. Each creature had its own way, but they were here, together, bound by something invisible. Sometimes you don't need to do much. Sometimes just sitting quietly and listening is enough to understand. That night, after the lights were off, Elliot stepped out onto the porch again. Outside, the wind blew softly, but the air still carried the chill of winter. The moonlight pierced through the trees, casting shadows onto the yard. The cold of the winter night lingered in the air, but Elliot didn't rush back inside. He stood there for a while, eyes fixed on the darkness, listening to the distant rustling of leaves. When he stepped outside, he saw the familiar sight, Tara was lying still, her back turned to Ember. Ember, the little lynx, was curled up beside her, but her tail was almost touching Tara's. Neither of them moved, just breathing evenly, as if there was nothing more important than this moment. Ember's eyes were wide open, but there was no sign of fear. Tara lay quietly, her gaze flicking over once before turning away. A perfect silence. Elliot stood there for a while, watching them, then sighed softly. "I thought I was just saving a kitten," he whispered, as if speaking to himself. He didn't feel regret or sorrow, but he knew that what he was witnessing wasn't just an act of salvation. It was a silent connection, a bond between two creatures he couldn't name. He looked out into the dim night, then back at Tara and Ember. Everything passed quietly like this. No need to understand too much. No need to explain. Just by looking, he could feel the connection between them. Tara lay still, occasionally licking Ember's ear gently. Ember didn't react, just curled up, her head resting against Tara's body. They both welcomed the cold of the night, as if it were a habit, as if it was part of their relationship. Elliot stood there for a few more seconds before finally sitting down on the wooden step, silent. There was no more worry, no more second-guessing. Just by watching, he understood. It wasn't about the dog or the lynx, it was about the bond. They had started to understand each other in their own way. Sometimes, you don't need to name everything. Sometimes, all you need is silence and let things unfold on their own. Elliot smiled softly, then stood up and walked into the cabin. He left behind two creatures sharing a peaceful moment in the night. A moment where there were no sounds, no words, just their presence. Inside, the kitchen light still cast a soft glow on the wooden walls. The furniture remained still, unchanged. But when Elliot stepped into the living room, his eyes narrowed. It wasn't the dim light, it was the eerie silence. There was no Tara. Elliot froze in the doorway, his eyes quickly scanning the room. Tara's food bowl was still on the floor. The cup of water was full, steam still rising from the warm liquid. But there was no Tara. He quickly moved toward the door, flinging it open, and looked toward the back lawn. Nothing. "Tara!" Elliot called out loudly, but there was no response. No bark, no sound. Only the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. He started walking along the trails around the cabin, glancing at the damp earth, looking for any sign of Tara. "Tara!" he called again. Still silence, only the echo of his footsteps in the grass. Elliot quickened his pace, calling out louder, "Tara, where are you?" Anxiety grew within him as he walked, filled with unspoken questions. When he reached the small trail that led up the hill, his heart pounded in his chest. Tara was still nowhere to be found. Then, suddenly, a familiar sound broke the silence. 3 short, sharp howls, clear, precise. It was a K9 distress signal, a sound Elliot had heard countless times during his days in the rescue unit. Elliot froze mid-step, his eyes widening. He stood there for a long moment, an indescribable feeling rising in his chest. 3 howls, no mistake. It was a distress signal only a K9 would make. It had to be Tara. Elliot spun around, running back to the cabin. His body surged with urgency. He didn't care about the rocks or branches in his path. The howl still echoed in his mind. As soon as he entered the cabin, his eyes locked on Ember. She wasn't lying still like usual. She had gotten up, her ears perked, staring at him with wide eyes as if waiting. "Ember?" Elliot whispered, stepping closer. Ember only stared at him, not reacting. Then, as if something inside her couldn't wait any longer, Ember moved, slowly but decisively. She ran out the door, glanced back once, then continued running toward the forest. Elliot didn't hesitate. He followed, opening the door and sprinting after her. Ember dashed ahead, turning toward the woods, toward where Tara needed saving. For the first time since Ember arrived at the cabin, Elliot felt like he wasn't leading the way anymore. Ember was leading him. Ember broke out of the crate, not with aggression, but with purpose. She ran a short distance, then turned back to look at Elliot, her eyes sharp as if checking that he was following. Every few steps, she would look back and growl softly, as if telling him, "Follow me." Elliot stood still for a moment, watching Ember lead the way. She wasn't rushing, moving steadily, as if she knew exactly where she was going. His steps were slower at first, but soon he started running to catch up. Ember continued ahead, zigzagging through the trees, quick and stealthy, like a strategy in motion. She didn't look back as often, only occasionally turning her head to check if Elliot was still behind her. Elliot pushed himself harder, but the unease lingered in him. The silence in the forest felt unusual. Normally the woods would be filled with the sounds of insects, birds, but now there was only the sound of their footsteps, his and Ember's. His pace slowed as he stopped to catch his breath, only to see Ember's small steps continue forward without hesitation. A short while later they came to a small slope. Shadows from the trees stretched long across the ground, and the weak light from the moon filtered through the branches. Ember suddenly stopped at the edge of the slope, looking down at the bottom of the hill, then turned back to look at Elliot one last time. Then, she let out a low growl, but just enough to make Elliot tense. The growl wasn't one of threat, but of warning. "We're here." Elliot stepped forward, his heart racing. He followed Ember's gaze, and when he reached the edge of the slope, the moonlight illuminated something that made his heart tighten. Tara. The dog lay motionless on the ground. Her hind leg was caught in a snare trap, blood smeared in a long streak across the earth. Tara's face looked tired, but there was no sign of anger or pain. She just breathed heavily, as though all her strength had been drained. Ember stood in front of Tara, staring intently at the snare trap. She growled low, her ears standing straight, as if she was guarding Tara. Elliot froze, unable to move. His eyes were fixed on Tara, lying motionless, while Ember never once took her eyes off the dog. A different kind of fear filled him. Not fear of death, but the fear of something he couldn't control. Elliot stepped closer, still not looking away from Tara. "What happened to you?" he whispered. He knelt beside Tara and touched her leg. Tara flinched slightly, but didn't react. Ember stayed in place, blocking the way to Tara, her eyes flicking between Elliot and Tara. Elliot quickly assessed the injury. The snare had tightened too much. How did this happen?" he murmured, sweat beading on his forehead. Ember growled softly, then finally turned her gaze to Elliot, as though she had been waiting. Elliot knew what he had to do. He carefully removed the snare, then tried to help Tara stand, but the dog was too weak to hold herself up. Ember didn't leave. She stood still, like a friend, a comrade, protecting Tara while Elliot tried to help. Elliot moved cautiously, not daring to make any sudden movements. He knew Tara was weak, but there were no signs of aggression. She just breathed heavily, in pain, watching everything around her as if she was still guarding something. When he got close, Tara let out a low growl, but there was no attack. Elliot's hands trembled as he checked the snare around her leg. It had been so tight it had caused a lot of bleeding. Tara only furrowed her brow, but still made no attempt to fight him off. Elliot gently removed the snare, but when he touched the wound, Tara let out a long breath and flinched. Ember didn't move, still standing guard in front of Tara, her eyes bright, challenging Elliot silently. Elliot knew there was no time to waste. He carefully pulled Tara up, supporting her back end. Tara breathed raggedly, but seemed to recognize that someone was helping her. She glanced at Elliot once more, then relaxed. Meanwhile, Ember lowered her head, gently licking the wound on Tara's leg. Her tongue brushed over the damaged skin as if trying to stop the bleeding. Not out of fear, but like a protective instinct, just like Tara had once taught her. Elliot watched them both, his throat tightening. Damn it. If I hadn't followed, the dog would have died. If you hadn't howled, you'd have lost a friend. At that moment, it seemed Ember understood the emotion in his words. She looked into Elliot's eyes, then gently stepped aside. Not because she no longer needed help, but because she knew Elliot had done everything he could. Elliot gently placed Tara down on the ground, patting her back. You're not alone anymore. I'm here. Tara looked up at him, her tired eyes soft, her body relaxed but still holding no fear or confusion. She just needed the presence of Elliot and Ember, the teammates, the friends she had always trusted. Ember stayed beside her, never leaving. She sat close to Tara, her body low but her gaze still bright, protective. Elliot watched them for a long while, then carefully took a clean cotton pad and began bandaging Tara's wound. In that moment he realized he hadn't just saved Tara. It was the three of them, the three creatures, saving each other in the simplest way, through trust and persistence. In the days that followed, Elliot didn't leave the cabin for long. In the mornings, he checked Tara's wound, constantly worried about her condition. But gradually, Tara showed signs of recovery. Her movements were still slow, but she was starting to heal. Ember, though still weak, continued to lie close to Tara every time he worked. As for Elliot, despite the tension, he tried to stay calm. But the more the days passed, the more he realized things couldn't go on like this. Thoughts kept circling in his mind, repeating. Everything in this house was changing too quickly. One morning, as he was preparing breakfast, Elliot received a call from the Ridgepoint Wildlife Center. "Hello, Mr. Rayner?" The voice on the other end sounded familiar but distant. "This is Mary from the Ridgepoint station. We've assessed Ember's condition. After evaluation, we've confirmed that the lynx is fit to survive. However, according to regulations, it will be taken to the station within 48 hours to be prepared for release back into the wild." Elliot stopped, holding his cup, his eyes not leaving the table where Ember and Tara were sitting together. "So, it's being taken away?" Elliot asked, his voice heavy. "Yes. We will come to retrieve Ember and take it away. Regulations are regulations, and they can't be changed. It's not a pet," Mary replied coldly. Elliot felt his heart stop for a moment. He held the cup, his eyes scanning the cabin, the place he had called home for so long. The atmosphere was still as it always had been, but today it felt different. He could feel it. The change was unmistakable. "She's not a wild lynx anymore." Elliot's voice was filled with anger, but beneath it, there was a deep sense of disappointment. On the other end, Mary remained calm, her voice unemotional. "I understand how you feel, but regulations are regulations. She won't be allowed to stay, no matter what." Elliot stood still for a moment, then lowered himself onto the wooden step, silent. He wasn't worried anymore, nor did he need to think. Just by looking, he understood. It wasn't about the dog or the lynx, it was about the connection. They had started to understand each other in their own way. Sometimes you don't need to name everything. Sometimes all you need is silence, and let things unfold on their own. Elliot smiled softly, then stood up and walked into the cabin. He left behind two creatures sharing a peaceful moment in the night, where there were no sounds, no words, just the presence of each other. Inside, The kitchen light still cast a soft glow on the wooden walls. The furniture remained still, unchanged. But when Elliot stepped into the living room, his eyes narrowed. It wasn't the dim light, it was the eerie silence. There was no Tara. Elliot froze in the doorway, his eyes quickly scanning the room. Tara's food bowl was still on the floor. The cup of water was full, steam still rising from the warm liquid. But there was no Tara. He quickly moved toward the door, flinging it open, and looked toward the back lawn. Nothing. "Tara!" Elliot called out loudly, but there was no response. No bark, no sound, only the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. He started walking along the trails around the cabin, glancing at the damp earth, looking for any sign of Tara. "Tara!" he called again. Still silence, only the echo of his footsteps in the grass. Elliot quickened his pace, calling out louder, "Tara, where are you?" Anxiety grew within him as he walked, filled with unspoken questions. When he reached the small trail that led up the hill, his heart pounded in his chest. Tara was still nowhere to be found. Then, suddenly, a familiar sound broke the silence. 3 short, sharp howls, clear, precise. It was a K9 distress signal, a sound Elliot had heard countless times during his days in the rescue unit. Elliot froze mid-step, his eyes widening. He stood there for a long moment, an indescribable feeling rising in his chest. 3 howls, no mistake. It was a distress signal only a K9 would make. It had to be Tara. Elliot spun around, running back to the cabin. His body surged with urgency. He didn't care about the rocks or branches in his path. The howl still echoed in his mind. As soon as he entered the cabin, his eyes locked on Ember. She wasn't lying still like usual. She had gotten up, her ears perked, staring at him with wide eyes as if waiting. "Ember?" Elliot whispered, stepping closer. Ember only stared at him, not reacting. Then, as if something inside her couldn't wait any longer, Ember moved, slowly but decisively. She ran out the door, glanced back once, then continued running toward the forest. Elliot didn't hesitate. He followed, opening the door and sprinting after her. Ember dashed ahead, turning toward the woods, toward where Tara needed saving. For the first time since Ember arrived at the cabin, Elliot felt like he wasn't leading the way anymore. Ember was leading him. Ember broke out of the crate, not with aggression, but with purpose. She ran a short distance, then turned back to look at Elliot, her eyes sharp as if checking that he was following. Every few steps, she would look back and growl softly, as if telling him, "Follow me." Elliot stood still for a moment, watching Ember lead the way. She wasn't rushing, moving steadily, as if she knew exactly where she was going. His steps were slower at first, but soon he started running to catch up. Ember continued ahead, zigzagging through the trees, quick and stealthy, like a strategy in motion. She didn't look back as often, only occasionally turning her head to check if Elliot was still behind her. Elliot pushed himself harder, but the unease lingered in him. The silence in the forest felt unusual. Normally, the woods would be filled with the sounds of insects, birds, but now there was only the sound of their footsteps, his and Ember's. His pace slowed as he stopped to catch his breath, only to see Ember's small steps continue forward without hesitation. A short while later, they came to a small slope. Shadows from the trees stretched long across the ground, and the weak light from the moon filtered through the branches. Ember suddenly stopped at the edge of the slope, looking down at the bottom of the hill, then turned back to look at Elliot one last time. Then she let out a low growl, but just enough to make Elliot tense. The growl wasn't one of threat, but of warning. "We're here." Elliot stepped forward, his heart racing. He followed Ember's gaze, and when he reached the edge of the slope, the moonlight illuminated something that made his heart tighten. Tara. The dog lay motionless on the ground. Her hind leg was caught in a snare trap, blood smeared in a long streak across the earth. Tara's face looked tired, but there was no sign of anger or pain. She just breathed heavily, as though all her strength had been drained. Elliot stood frozen, his hand still gripping the leash tightly, heart pounding in his chest. The world outside felt unreal, like everything was moving in slow motion. He stared at Tara, standing tall and strong, growling softly but unyielding. Ember sat silently in her crate, eyes wide, waiting for something, watching the approaching men with a steady gaze that seemed far too mature for a young wild animal. In that moment, Elliot understood. It wasn't just about a lynx. It wasn't even about the law or the rules he had to follow. This was about something deeper, something unspoken. The bond between Tara and Ember, and the one Elliot had with them, was more than just survival. It was about loyalty, protection, and a quiet understanding of what it meant to have someone by your side. The two men in protective suits approached slowly, hands gripping nets to cover Ember. One moved toward the crate, the other readying himself to cast the net over her head. But Tara wasn't backing down. She stepped forward, blocking their path, her eyes never leaving the men. She wasn't growling like a guard dog on duty. There was no anger, no aggression, just the simple, unwavering determination to protect. The air around them felt thick, charged, like something was about to break. Elliot's grip on the leash tightened. He could feel Tara's silent strength beside him. He knew in his gut that he couldn't let this happen. Not like this. But as much as he wanted to act, he knew the rules, the law. Everything in his mind told him that what was happening right now was inevitable, but his heart didn't want to accept it. As one of the men stepped closer to the crate, Tara let out another low growl. It wasn't the kind of bark that would send someone running. It wasn't a threat, but it was enough to stop the man in his tracks. The growl was tired, strained. Tara was weakening. Her body was exhausted, her movements slower than before, but she still stood firm. Elliot's mind raced. He wanted to act, to do something, anything. But his legs felt like lead. He could feel the weight of Tara's decision in her every move, and the weight of his own fear of not being able to protect them from what was coming. The men moved cautiously, their eyes wary now, but still determined. They reached for the net, and that's when Tara lunged, quick, but not as fast as she used to be. The man who was closest to the crate stumbled back, but it wasn't enough to stop them. Tara's growl was fading, replaced by the heavy breathing of a dog who had given all she had. A dog who had fought for one too many things already. Elliot watched as the men closed in on Ember, reaching for her. The sight of them taking her, of that quiet animal world being torn apart, made his heart drop into his stomach. He couldn't let it happen. But what could he do? His instincts screamed at him to stop them, but Tara's fight was running out, and Ember was still too weak to defend herself. The moment felt endless. Then, without thinking, Elliot moved. He couldn't just stand by and watch. He stepped forward, his voice hoarse but firm, calling out, "Stop!" The words felt weak in the air, but it was all he could do. The two men paused, looking at him as though they were unsure of his next move. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one of them spoke, his voice cold. "You're not allowed to keep her." Elliot swallowed, staring back at them, his face a mixture of frustration and helplessness. "I don't care about your rules," he said, voice shaking. "I care about what's right." The man in the protective suit exchanged a glance with his partner. "We're just following protocol," the other man said, his tone flat. Elliot's mind raced. Protocol! Your protocol doesn't mean anything in the face of what's real. What's happening here is real. You can't just take her. He could feel the anger rising in him. But it wasn't just anger at the men or at the situation. It was the anger of knowing that he was powerless in the face of a world that didn't understand this bond between animals, the world that saw rules as more important than the lives that those rules affected. Tara's growl continued to vibrate the air. She wasn't moving now, but she was still there, still holding her ground, even if her strength was waning. Then, without warning, Ember leaped from the crate, darting forward in a blur. The men were caught off guard, one of them stumbling back. Ember stopped just in front of Elliot, looking at him with a fierce determination that matched Tara's. The two men froze. It was clear now. Ember wasn't just a passive animal. She was fighting for herself, for Tara, for the home she had found. The silence stretched long, and in that moment, Elliot realized that this wasn't just about a lynx and a dog. It was about survival. It was about standing together even when the world tried to tear you apart. Without another word, the men backed off, their faces hardening. They didn't retreat, but their posture shifted. And in that shift, Elliot knew he had won for now. He stepped forward, crouching beside Ember, who was still tense, her body ready to spring again if needed. He placed a hand on her back, gently, the way he had done so many times with Tara. "You're safe," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if that would ever be true again. The men finally turned and walked back to their truck, but Elliot didn't take his eyes off them until they were gone. And as the truck disappeared down the path, the quiet of the woods settled in again. But it felt different this time. Elliot stood there for a long moment, his heart still racing, unsure of what had just happened, but feeling the weight of what was to come. Tara, standing beside him now, looked up at him. Her eyes, though tired, spoke volumes. And Ember? Ember was still standing strong, her eyes sharp, her body ready for whatever the world would throw next. Elliot stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes locked on the thin trail of blood leading to the door, the same door Tara had passed through only hours before. The sight hit him like a punch to the gut. He knew something was wrong. He could feel it deep in his bones. The blood was fresh. His mind raced. Where is Tara? His feet moved without thought, carried by an overwhelming urge to find answers. He pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges louder than usual, and stepped out into the cool air. The evening sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees, and the quiet seemed to weigh on him, as though the world was holding its breath. Elliot followed the blood trail. It was faint, but it led deeper into the forest, away from the cabin. He glanced back, his eyes briefly landing on Ember, who sat silently in the doorway, watching him with those knowing eyes. Ember didn't move. She didn't need to. She knew what was happening. As Elliot walked, his mind replayed the events of the past days. Tara's silence, Ember's learning, the bond they had formed. And now this. Tara had gone after something important. He could feel it, the urgency, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The trail of blood twisted through the underbrush, leading him to a small clearing. It was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of the forest absent. Elliot's breath quickened as his eyes scanned the area. And then he saw it. Tara was there, lying motionless, just beyond a cluster of trees. His heart sank. She was alive, but weak, her body covered in blood. Her breathing was shallow, strained. Her eyes, once full of fire and determination, now looked up at him with a mix of exhaustion and regret. Elliot rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her. "Tara," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. His hands shook as he gently touched her, feeling her ribs rise and fall with labored breaths. He saw the deep gashes on her side, the marks of a struggle. Tara had fought for something, had fought to protect. Ember appeared beside him, her silent presence a comfort. She didn't need to do anything. She just stood, watching over her friend, watching over Tara. Elliot couldn't believe it. This was his responsibility, his choice. But now he was here, with Tara bleeding out in front of him, knowing that if he didn't act fast, he could lose her forever. The thoughts spun in his head. What do I do? His mind raced for a solution, but nothing seemed right. There was no way to fix this on his own. He needed help. He needed time, but time was something they didn't have. With trembling hands, he lifted Tara's head slightly, cradling it in his arms. Her eyes met his, and for a moment there was a flicker of recognition. A spark. Tara, despite everything, still recognized him. "I'm here," Elliot whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not leaving you. We're not done yet." Ember stepped closer, standing guard, her body tense but loyal. Elliot glanced at her, his heart aching with the bond they shared. Together the three of them had built something unspoken, yet stronger than any rule, any law, or any protocol. The world around them felt like it was closing in, but for just a moment, the three of them were still. Together. Waiting. Elliot's mind raced, but his heart remained steady. He wouldn't let this be the end. He wouldn't lose them. He couldn't. He stood slowly, his legs aching from kneeling. Ember's gaze was steady on him, her silent understanding clear. Tara's breathing was weak, but she was still alive. That was all that mattered for now. "Stay with me, Tara," he said softly, as if she could understand every word. "We're going to get through this. Together." And so, in that clearing, with the forest holding its breath and the moon beginning to rise overhead, the three of them waited. There was no certainty, no guarantees, but in that moment, Elliot knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about survival. This was about a bond that could never be broken. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The trail of blood stretched from the edge of the forest up to the porch. It wasn't a deep stain, but enough to make Elliot's heart race. The smell of blood mixed with the earth and the damp scent of autumn. Elliot stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. A shiver of fear ran down his spine. This wasn't just a regular wound. This was the blood of a creature, not Tara's, but of an animal that was hurt. He hurried outside, his eyes fixed on the blood trail. His steps were quick, unthinking. Each stride was heavy with worry, but he couldn't stop. The blood led him across the yard, around the back of the cabin. When he looked up, the faint light of dusk filtered through the trees, and from the shadows of the woods, a tired, limping figure emerged. It was Ember. Her fur was matted, covered in dirt, and her steps were weak, dragging her body. Her stomach was slightly sunken from hunger, but Ember's eyes still held that same sharpness, the same strength they had when she first stepped into Elliot's life. "Ember," Elliot whispered, barely believing his eyes. He walked toward her, his chest tight. Ember didn't make a sound, didn't show any visible pain, only limped forward, but her eyes never left him. That gaze, steady and unwavering, as if she was searching for something familiar, something comforting. Elliot knelt down, his voice caught in his throat. Why did you go so far?" Ember didn't answer, but her limping steps seemed like a response. She couldn't go any further. Despite all the challenges she'd faced in the woods, she had returned, as if by some miracle no one expected. Elliot bent down, without thinking, and gently pulled Ember into his arms. She panted heavily but didn't resist. Only silence enveloped them both. Ember's eyes no longer held the wildness or fear of before, but peace. Elliot didn't know what to do, but at that moment, it was all that mattered. Ember's return wasn't a simple miracle. It was the affirmation that, no matter the trials, something would always pull us together. And that's why both Tara and Ember could find each other in the darkest of times. Elliot sat there, holding Ember in his lap, looking out toward the woods. The space around them grew quieter with every passing second, but inside him, there was something filling him up. An understanding that perhaps we don't always need to chase what we want, but sometimes we just need to stand still and wait for something to return. Suddenly, a growl rang out from behind Elliot. Tara sprang from the shadows, her front paw lifting before collapsing to the ground. Her body seemed to fall under the weight of gravity, her breath sharp and quick. In that instant, everything around them seemed to stop, leaving only Tara's breath and Ember's bright eyes in the darkness. Ember didn't hesitate. She ran straight to Tara, lowering her face to the dogs. The two animals collided, their faces brushing together in a tender lick. The growl wasn't a battle cry. It was a call, a greeting after being apart for so long. All the days spent in the forest, the trials they couldn't recount, seemed like distant memories now. They had found each other. Elliot stood there, eyes welled with tears. He couldn't hold back the tears because, in that moment, he realized that these two creatures were no longer strangers. They had lived together, survived together, and now they had found each other. A moment later, Elliot sat beside the two animals, his head down, unable to suppress the emotions that surged through him. All his fears, everything he thought he would lose, had now become something invisible, yet powerful. A connection that didn't need words, didn't need demands, only the ability to feel. In that moment, everything was silent. Suddenly, Elliot's phone rang, startling him. He picked up the phone and heard a voice on the other end. "Hello, Mr. Rayner. This is Mary from the Ridgepoint station. We've just confirmed Ember's status. It escaped from the wild release area by squeezing through a gap just 7 centimeters wide, crossing 19 kilometers of forest and river to return to where you live. This behavior has never been documented in the history of lynx conservation." The words hit Elliot like a punch to the chest. Ember wasn't a captured creature. She wasn't an animal torn from her world. She had escaped and done something no one could have expected. A wild creature, held captive, had found a way to free herself, not because she was weak, but because she had the strength to break all barriers. Elliot was speechless, unable to reply. After the voice on the other end fell silent, Elliot could only exhale slowly. "She doesn't need a cage. She needs them. And me, a man no longer young, just needs to witness that every morning, every evening, until the day I can't open this door anymore." Elliot put down the phone, looking back at Ember and Tara, still wrapped up in each other, as if nothing could separate them. In the silent space of the cabin, Elliot knew one thing for sure. Love, loyalty, and real connection are not things we can control, but things we learn through time and trials. And in this moment, he had found it all. Thank you for reading this story. Today, we've witnessed the incredible strength and loyalty of Tara and Ember. They are not just animals, they are symbols of resilience, perseverance, and unconditional love. If you're facing difficulties or moments when you want to give up, remember that you can overcome every challenge. Just like Tara and Ember, we all have the inner strength to keep fighting. Each small step brings you closer to your goal. Never let fear or temporary setbacks stop you. If you find this story inspiring, don't forget to like and share the video. hit the subscribe button to never miss out on our content. Could an abandoned tiger cub in the middle of a snowstorm change the life of a family? When Tom and Lena decide to save the tiny life, they have no idea that this decision will lead them to an even greater challenge than ever before. But will they be able to keep Leo when its wild instincts begin to emerge? You know, sometimes the smallest decisions can change everything. It was a cold, stormy night when Tom and Lena made the choice to save a life they never expected to encounter. The snowstorm was unforgiving, blanketing everything in a thick, white silence, turning the world outside into a frozen maze. It was hard to see, hard to move, but still, they walked as if the storm didn't exist, until it did. Tom and Lena were used to the winter trails, the quiet of the forest, but this time it felt different. The wind was biting, and the snow danced wildly, like the trees themselves were shuddering under its weight. Rex and Max, their two German shepherds, were ahead of them, their strong paws cutting through the deep snow with ease. But something in the air felt off. Even the dogs, usually so bold, seemed hesitant, their steps slower, as if they sensed something neither Tom nor Lena could. And then the silence shattered. A sharp, urgent bark from Rex sliced through the howling wind. Max stopped, tail raised, sniffing the frozen air. The dogs took off into the trees, pulling Lena and Tom behind them. They ran faster, the snow crunching under their boots, but the storm made it impossible to keep up. They could only hear the sound of paws against snow echoing through the night, and the growing feeling in Tom's chest. Something wasn't right. "Lena, wait up!" Tom called out, but his voice was lost to the wind. Lena didn't hear him. She was already moving with the dogs, trusting them, following the instinct that had always served them well. Then, just when Tom thought they couldn't go any further, Rex stopped at the edge of a narrow ravine, his body tense, eyes locked on something ahead. He barked once, sharp and urgent, his usual cheerfulness replaced with a deep, protective warning. Max didn't hesitate. He moved forward, his steps sure, then stopped and looked back, waiting for them to catch up. Tom's heart raced as they reached the edge of the ravine, the wind picking up, making it harder to see. And then, through the thick curtain of snow, he saw it. A small shape huddled against the frozen ground, barely visible against the white. It was a cub, a tiger cub, weak and barely breathing, its tiny body covered in blood, its fur matted and darkened. It was so small, too small to be left out in a storm like this, yet there it was, abandoned in the snow, alone. Tom's legs trembled as he kneeled beside the cub, feeling its cold, fragile body beneath his hands. He could barely believe what he was seeing, a creature that should have been protected by its mother, left to die in the harshest of elements. He could see the marks on its body, the signs of a cruel life. And there, in the snow beside it, were signs of poachers, the footprints in the fresh snow, the shell casings half buried, the remnants of a hunt. Tom's heart twisted. Number he couldn't leave it, not like this. His breath was shallow as he looked down at the little cub, barely clinging to life. "It's so cold." Lena's voice trembled as she stepped closer, her eyes filling with concern. Is it still alive?" Tom didn't answer right away. He pressed his hand against the cub's side, feeling the faint rise and fall of its chest. It was still alive, but barely. Time was running out. Lena's hand was on his shoulder now, warm despite the chill, and he turned to meet her gaze. Her eyes were filled with the same silent resolve he felt. "We can't let it die here, Tom." "We won't," he whispered back, his voice barely audible over the storm. His mind was already made up. They weren't going to let this creature die alone in the snow. They would save it, somehow. Max and Rex stood still, eyes fixed on the cub. Max, ever the protector, stepped forward and gently nuzzled the cub, as if offering it comfort. His tail wagged once, reassuringly, before he pulled back and sat by Tom and Lena, waiting. Tom carefully picked up the tiny tiger, its body trembling in his arms. It was lighter than he expected, its bones thin and fragile. As he cradled the cub against his chest, he could feel its shallow breaths, each one a struggle. The storm roared louder, but they didn't care. They had a life to save. "We'll take it home," Lena said, her voice firm, though her eyes were full of worry. She didn't need to say more. Tom just nodded, determined. As they walked back through the storm, the snow swirling around them, Rex and Max leading the way, they didn't look back. They didn't need to. The cub was in their arms now, and that was all that mattered. The storm was still fierce, but somehow it felt a little less cold. Maybe it was the warmth of the tiny creature in Tom's arms, or maybe it was the feeling that, no matter how dark things got, there was always a chance to do something good, to protect, to heal. When they finally made it back to the house, Tom felt the weight of the cub in his arms, still weak but alive. They would care for it. They would do everything they could. In that moment, Tom understood. No one could have predicted what this storm would bring, but it had brought them something they couldn't ignore. A chance. A second chance for a life that had almost been lost. And no matter what, they weren't going to let it slip away. The wounds on the cub weren't just accidents. They were deliberate, as if caused by something sharp, something dangerous. The deep gashes along the tiger's body looked like the work of poachers' weapons. Tom stopped for a moment, his breath heavy, his heart racing. His mother, she must have been killed, he muttered under his breath. He took a deep breath and held the cub tighter, feeling the faint rise and fall of its breaths. The footprints in the snow, the spent bullet casings he'd found earlier, all pointed to the same grim truth. The mother had been shot. Now, this little cub was left all alone, abandoned in the unforgiving cold of the snowstorm, with no one to protect it. Lena stood beside him, her face tight with concern. She looked at the cub in Tom's arms, her eyes full of sympathy and worry. She knew that raising a wild animal in their home would be dangerous, almost impossible. But seeing the pain in the cub's eyes, she couldn't turn away. "It won't survive if we leave it here," Lena said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the decision. Rex and Max approached cautiously, sniffing the cub, checking for signs of danger. But instead of showing their usual alertness or wariness, the dogs just stood quietly by, their eyes soft, as though they understood the gravity of the situation. Rex leaned in, gently licking the cub's tiny head, as if trying to soothe its pain. Max circled around, his bright eyes never leaving Tom and Lena, waiting for them to decide. "Looks like Rex and Max are on board," Tom said with a small smile, though his heart was heavy with the weight of their decision. Raising this cub would be no small task, but with the dog's quiet acceptance, he felt a little more certain of the path ahead. Lena glanced at Tom, then back at Rex and Max, her loyal dogs. They had all been through so much together, and now they had a new member, a wild animal in need of protection. The air grew even colder as the wind howled through the trees and the snow piled higher. But despite the harsh conditions, Tom and Lena knew they had to continue. They didn't say much, just walked together, facing the storm with quiet resolve. The little tiger in Tom's arms had become a part of their family now, and this decision would change everything. Lena's voice trembled with emotion as she asked, "Do you think it will survive?" Tom looked down at the cub, then at Lena. "We'll do everything we can," he replied, his voice deep and full of determination. That wasn't just a promise to Lena, it was a promise to himself and to the little tiger they had taken in. He couldn't let a creature so vulnerable slip away without trying. Under the heavy blanket of snow, the family moved forward, together with Rex, Max, and now Leo. It was a new journey, one that was full of unknowns, full of challenges. But they wouldn't give up on each other. When they reached home, Tom carefully laid the cub, Leo, on an old bed they'd set up in the living room. The warmth of the house was a sharp contrast to the freezing cold outside. The family worked quickly, preparing everything they could to help Leo. Lena took a warm towel and gently wiped away the ice and snow from his tiny, fragile body. Tom placed a space heater nearby to warm the air. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like they were caring for a fragile child. Clara, Tom's wife and a veterinarian, stood quietly in the corner of the room, her hands clenched together. Her gaze was fixed on the cub lying on the bed. She couldn't shake the worry from her mind. Raising a wild animal in their home was dangerous, especially one so young and fragile. But even as she saw how small and weak Leo was, she knew there was no turning back. "Tom," Clara's voice was soft, but there was concern in it. "Do you think we can care for it long term? This tiger, it's not like the other animals we've had before." She looked at Leo, her eyes filled with worry. She understood wild animals and the risks involved in caring for them. Leo was a wild creature, born to live in the wild, not in a house. Tom turned to face her, his expression serious but with a trace of doubt hidden beneath his resolve. "I know it's not easy, but we can't let him die. Leo needs us," he said quietly, his hand brushing over the cub's soft fur. "We'll do everything we can." Lena approached the bed, looking down at Leo with tenderness. "This little tiger is like a lost child. It doesn't have anyone else but us," she said gently, running her hand over Leo's cold body. Clara looked at her, then back at Tom. "But I can't stop worrying about the danger. When it grows up, it won't be so easy to manage," she said cautiously. "We can't forget, it's a wild animal. Its instincts will become stronger as it grows." Tom took a deep breath and placed his hand on Clara's shoulder. "I understand that, but we'll figure it out. We'll take care of him like family, but we'll also prepare for what comes next." He turned to look at Leo, the little cub now lying on the bed, its golden eyes fixed on him. He could feel the cub's weakness, but also the quiet strength in its gaze. Rex and Max walked over, sitting by Leo's bed, as if they too understood the importance of this moment. Max gently licked the cub's head in a gesture of affection. Rex laid his head on Tom's lap, his eyes full of concern. "It seems like Rex and Max have accepted him," Lena said softly. "They see Leo as part of our family." Clara smiled, but her eyes were still full of worry. "I hope so, but we can't forget this isn't a dog. It's a wild creature." The family fell silent for a moment, but Tom knew that no matter how hard the road ahead would be, they had made their choice. They would save Leo. He could feel the love from Lena, the worry from Clara, and the acceptance from Rex and Max. It wasn't just a rescue, it was a bond, a family formed across species, united in a decision to protect and care for each other. With this decision, Tom's family had embarked on a new journey, a journey full of challenges, but also full of love. They had chosen to be Leo's family, and they would face whatever came next together. Even as Leo slowly recovered, and the wounds on his tiny body began to heal, Clara's worries lingered, but she couldn't deny the bond they had all already formed. Tom could feel the weight of Clara's worry pressing down on him. She stood in the corner of the room, her arms folded tightly, watching Leo as he lay on the bed, his golden eyes gazing back at her with a sense of innocence that made her heart ache. But no matter how innocent those eyes seemed, Clara couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in her chest. Every time she looked at Leo, she remembered the raw, wild power of a tiger's instincts. She couldn't stop thinking about the dangers of raising a wild animal in their home. Tom noticed the tension in Clara's face. He understood her concerns. He shared them, to some extent, but he still believed that they could keep Leo safe. He understood the fear in Clara's eyes, but he also saw how much their family had already bonded with the cub. They had done everything they could to care for it, and Leo was changing in ways that Tom hadn't expected. However, the real question in his mind wasn't whether Leo was dangerous right now. It was what would happen when the cub grew up. Could they live with a wild animal in their house as it matured? Would Leo's instincts eventually take over? Lena, standing by the door, could feel the tension in the air, too. She looked at Leo, a wild animal slowly becoming a part of their family. But even with the love she felt for him, she couldn't ignore the heavy weight in her heart. Every day, Leo grew stronger, and though her feelings for him grew deeper, she couldn't help but worry about what the future would bring. Meanwhile, Leo continued to do things that surprised them all. Tom noticed how the cub seemed to be mimicking Rex and Max. One day, when Rex sat near the window, Leo slowly made his way over and copied him, sitting up straight, just like Rex. It was a moment so strange, yet so familiar. It was like Leo wasn't just a wild animal, but a creature learning, adapting, and trying to fit in. Clara witnessed this moment and couldn't help but voice her concerns. "Tom, do you see what he's doing? He's mimicking them, but he's not a dog. One day when he's older, his wild instincts will come back, and we won't be able to control him anymore." Her voice was full of worry, the fear that had been gnawing at her for so long finally slipping out. Tom took a deep breath, trying to steady himself before answering. "I get what you're saying, Clara, but I see the change in Leo too. He's still a wild animal, but he's also part of our family now. If we're patient and help him adjust, maybe he won't ever become a threat." But even as he said that, a part of Tom couldn't shake his own unease. He saw Leo's natural instincts coming to the surface, like when the cub chewed on things, testing the strength of his jaws, or the low growl that escaped his throat when he saw a shadow moving in the room. These were the behaviors of a tiger, a creature of the wild. And no matter how much they loved him, Tom had to wonder what would happen as Leo grew. As Clara continued to care for Leo, she couldn't ignore the sense of unease that seemed to settle in her bones. She knew that love and care could help Leo survive, but was that enough to protect her family from the danger that might arise? She looked at Leo, his golden eyes staring back at her. But in her heart, she couldn't erase the feeling that one day the wild side of him would return. Tom noticed the worry in Clara's eyes, but his gaze was unwavering. "We'll figure it out. I don't believe Leo will hurt us. He may be different, but he's just like us. He needs love and protection." He looked down at Leo, who was still lying on the bed, his eyes fixed on him. There was a quiet trust in Tom's heart. He believed that despite being wild, Leo could become part of their family. Clara stayed silent, her eyes softening as she looked at Leo. She knew what Tom said was true. They had already made a connection with Leo. He wasn't just some wild animal they had saved. He was theirs now. And while the future was uncertain, she couldn't ignore the love they had for him. Lena, standing near the door, looked at Leo with a gentle smile. She walked over to the cub, her fingers softly brushing through his fur. She turned to Clara, her voice calm but firm. "Mom, I don't see him as a wild animal anymore. He's part of our family now. I know you're worried, but we can't just abandon him." Her voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the conviction in her words. Clara looked at Lena, surprised by her daughter's shift in perspective. She had always been so passionate about animals, and now it seemed that Lena's bond with Leo was unbreakable. Clara understood that, But her deepest fear remained. The fear that as Leo grew, his wild instincts would overpower the love they had given him, and they wouldn't be able to control him anymore. "I understand your feelings, honey," Clara said, her voice softer now. "But don't you see? Leo is a wild animal. We're living in an environment that he doesn't belong in. No matter what, he'll be dangerous when he grows up." Lena smiled gently, looking back at Leo, who was peacefully sleeping. "But Mom, look at how much he's changed. Leo is copying Rex and Max. He's like a child who needs love and protection. If we don't keep him, who will take care of him?" Lena's words gave Clara pause. Tom could feel the internal struggle in Clara, but he also knew that their family wasn't just caring for a wild animal anymore. They had become a family with Leo. The bond they had formed couldn't be broken by fear of what might happen in the future. Tom turned back to Clara, his gaze steady. "You know we can't let Leo go back to the wild. He's part of our family now. We're not going to let him face the dangers out there alone." Clara sighed, feeling the weight of Tom's words. She looked at Leo one more time, then at Lena, whose unwavering determination was clear in her eyes. She couldn't deny that Leo had already become a part of their lives. Even though she still worried about the future, she knew that love and care were the only things that would keep Leo safe. "All right," Clara finally said, her voice softer. "We'll keep Leo. But we have to be very careful and prepare for what might happen when he grows up." Tom nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "We'll take care of him, and if Leo ever becomes dangerous, we'll figure it out. But for now, we'll do everything we can to make sure he feels safe." Rex and Max came over, sitting by Leo's bed, as if they were confirming that the family had made the right decision. Leo, though a wild animal, could feel the warmth of the love and protection that surrounded him. Clara looked at Leo once more, her expression softening. "If we're keeping him, we have to be ready for everything, and we can never forget, he will never be just a regular pet." But for Tom, for Lena, and for the family as a whole, they had already made up their minds. Leo was part of them now, and they would face whatever came next together. Tom nodded, his voice steady but filled with quiet certainty. "That's right. But love is the one thing that can change everything." "It's been 2 weeks now, and Leo's not cold anymore," Clara murmured, gently running her fingers through Leo's soft fur. Tom stood by the window, staring out at the swirling snowstorm outside. He could feel something different in the air, something that wasn't just the thawing chill of winter. There was a warmth now, a presence that wasn't just from the heat of their home, but from the wild creature inside it. Leo, the tiger cub who was starting to find warmth and belonging in their family. Tom couldn't deny the love he felt for Leo. Every time he looked at him, he didn't just see a wild animal, he saw a member of his family. "Leo started eating properly, and his wounds are healing," Clara continued, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I still don't understand why he's mimicking Rex and Max." Tom turned to look at her, his attention sharp. "I don't get it either. Leo's just starting to recover, and yet he's already walking like a dog. Every step he takes is like Rex or Max." Clara looked down at Leo, who was lying still on the bed, his eyes closed as if resting after a long day. A strange feeling lingered in her chest, a sense of unease that she couldn't shake. But can he really live like this? We're dealing with a wild tiger, not a pet. Tom walked over to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Have you seen Leo trying to mimic Rex and Max? It's not just by chance. He's trying to fit in, to learn how to live in a world he's never known before." "But don't you think when he grows up, his wild instincts will kick in?" Clara asked, her worry growing. Tom paused, looking at Leo, still resting peacefully. "I know that. But what matters is we've saved him. We've given him a chance to learn, to change, to live. His words were like a quiet promise, and Clara's anxiety softened, though she couldn't fully dismiss the doubts lingering in her heart. She couldn't deny that Leo was becoming part of their family. The love for him was undeniable, from both Tom and herself. In just a few days, Leo started showing strange behaviors. When Rex and Max ran around the house, Leo began following them. His first steps were like the dog's, strong, determined. Tom watched, astonished, as Leo sat down just like Max, tilting his head and following the dog's every move. "Unbelievable," Tom exclaimed, watching Leo try to mimic Max, the cub sitting just like him. Clara smiled lightly, the sight bringing a quiet joy to her heart. "It seems like he's trying to learn how to be a dog," Clara said softly. Tom laughed, making a note in his journal. Day 16. Leo starts mimicking Rex and Max. His actions are turning him into an irreplaceable part of our family. Day by day, Leo didn't just mimic their movements. He started joining Rex and Max in their simple games. Whenever Max ran around, Leo would follow, clumsy at first, but when he caught up, his tail wagged as if celebrating. Tom felt a warmth fill him as he watched Leo becoming more and more a part of their family. Yet a part of him couldn't help but worry. Would Leo's wild nature eventually take over as he grew older? One morning, as Rex dashed across the living room, Leo immediately chased after him, like a playful puppy. Max slowed down, letting Leo catch up. But just as Leo was about to reach Max, he stopped suddenly, crouching down and wagging his tail, just like the dogs when they played. Tom stood back, a smile crossing his face, but a flicker of unease stirred inside him. "Unbelievable," Tom said, his hand covering his face in disbelief as he watched Leo mimic Max's playful behavior. But even as he marveled at Leo, he couldn't shake the thought. What if Leo was becoming too friendly, too integrated into their world, losing the wild instincts he was born with? Clara looked out the window and chuckled softly at the sight. "Looks like Leo's trying to prove he can be a shepherd dog," she said, though her voice still held a hint of concern. Tom sat down next to her, nodding. "I know, but don't you think Leo is trying to connect with us? He's not just a wild tiger anymore. He's part of this family." Clara sat quietly for a moment, then spoke in a softer tone. "I don't think he can live here forever. No matter what, he's still a tiger. He's a wild animal." But even as she said it, Clara couldn't ignore the strange bond Leo was forming with Rex and Max. Leo wasn't just mimicking the dogs. He was slowly understanding the dynamics of their family. It made her feel torn. She was worried, but also moved by how far Leo had come. And then, one day, as Tom went outside to check on Leo with Rex and Max, he was stunned to see Leo attempting something he had only ever seen dogs do. Leo was trying to bark. The sound that came from the cub wasn't a bark at all. It was a soft growl, mixed with a strange wheezing noise, as if he was trying to imitate something he'd never known. Tom watched in awe as Leo looked at Rex and Max, his eyes shining with curiosity, waiting for a reaction. Max turned to look at the cub, then shook his head, as if wondering if he was dreaming. Tom's heart swelled at the sight. "That's just incredible," he whispered to himself. There, in front of him, was a wild animal trying to become part of their world. But deep down, a voice whispered in the back of his mind, was Leo truly fitting in, or was he losing his wild essence in the process? "Unbelievable, he's trying to bark," Tom exclaimed, his voice filled with amazement. He quickly jotted down in his notebook. Day 25. Leo tries to bark, though the sound is strange, a mix between a growl and a hiss. The whole family stood in awe of Leo's behavior, but Clara's worry only deepened. What do you think, Tom? Do you think Leo will be able to keep his wild instincts when he's starting to copy Max like this? Tom stood silently, watching Leo attempt to bark again, though it wasn't the bark he was used to hearing from Rex or Max. He couldn't answer immediately. Part of him didn't understand this strange change either. The truth was, Leo was starting to resemble a dog more than a tiger. Not only did he follow Max and Rex, but he also began to join in their games. Every time Max and Rex ran through the yard, Leo would chase after them. His steps were clumsy at first, unsteady like a puppy, but the eagerness and joy in his eyes were undeniable. Tom could sense the shift, the strange yet familiar way Leo was becoming part of the family. One day, when Rex was asleep on the couch, Leo walked over and curled up beside him. The cub's growing body took up almost all the space on the couch, but Max showed no sign of discomfort. Instead, Max simply glanced at Leo, sighed softly, and lay back down. Tom and Clara stood in the doorway, watching as Leo lay curled up beside Max, like a little puppy. The scene was so surreal, so hard to believe that the wild tiger they had saved was now blending so naturally into their family. "Leo, he really sees himself as part of this family," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She looked at the scene she had never imagined, a little cub, not only surviving the wild, but also finding warmth in the love of a family. Tom nodded, following Clara's thoughts. "I can't stop thinking about whether he really understands he's part of the family. He follows Rex and Max like he's one of them, without fear or hostility." Every morning when Tom went outside to tend to the garden, Leo followed right behind him, just like Rex and Max. Having 3 animals follow him, each with their own personality, but all deeply connected to him, felt like something he'd never experienced before. Leo wasn't just a wild animal following him. He was a family member, seeking connection and safety in the arms of those who cared for him. One day, Lena called to Leo from the kitchen. Leo turned, his eyes lighting up with expectation. Without hesitation, he trotted over to Lena, following her like a puppy following its owner. Tom watched from a distance. "He really gets it, doesn't he? He knows he's part of the family." Clara looked at the scene and felt like the whole world had narrowed down to this one peaceful moment. She realized she didn't fear anymore. Instead, there was a quiet, firm belief that Leo truly belonged with them. She walked over and gently stroked Leo's head, feeling the warmth in his tiger-like body. "Leo has fully integrated now," Clara said softly, her voice warm. "We saved him, but he's also saved us in a way. He's brought something into our lives that we can't quite define." Tom smiled. He understood exactly what Clara meant. Despite being a wild tiger, Leo was gradually becoming a part of their family, blending seamlessly into their daily lives. In the following days, Leo didn't just follow Rex and Max. He started joining in on their daily activities. Every morning, he'd sit beside Max as Rex ran around the yard. He no longer seemed out of place, acting just like a member of the pack. Slowly, the family realized that Leo was no longer just a wild tiger. He was beginning to understand his role in this family and the love they shared with him. Tom looked at Leo, curled up next to Max, his eyes soft with contentment. "He's become a part of our family now. He's not just a wild tiger anymore. He's one of us." Clara sat down beside Tom, a soft smile on her lips, but her eyes still carried a trace of worry. "You know, Leo's not just copying Rex and Max. This little tiger is really changing. The way he walks, runs, and plays with them, it's something we never thought possible with a tiger. I can't help but worry." Tom didn't respond right away. He reached out and gently stroked Leo's head, feeling the warmth of his body radiating through his hand. It was a strange feeling, joy mixed with tension. Leo seemed to sense their care and love, looking up at Tom with narrowed eyes as if appreciating the affection of his new family. "I understand," Tom said quietly, "but you know, Leo's learning. He's integrating into our family. That's a good sign." Clara couldn't help but worry. "I don't doubt his affection, but his wild instincts could burst forth at any moment. Can we keep him in this house forever? Can he live peacefully without posing a danger to us?" Tom took out his notebook from his jacket pocket, flipped it open, and began recording his daily observations about Leo. He couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened with the cub. Leo wasn't just a wild animal. He was becoming an irreplaceable part of their family. Day 30. Leo continues to mimic Rex and Max. He follows them every time they run, and sometimes even jumps in when they play. Today, Leo tried to mimic Max's bark, though the sound was very strange. Clara looked at Tom's notebook, the entries making her more uneasy. "Don't you see? These behaviors, even if they seem cute, make me feel unsettled. Leo can't be a dog. He's a tiger. I fear that when he grows up, his wild instincts will make him uncontrollable." Tom sighed and nodded. He didn't want to add to Clara's worries, but he knew she was right. Leo was growing, and these mimicking behaviors might just be temporary. But he couldn't deny that Leo had changed. He was no longer the wild cub they had saved. Clara looked at Leo, who was still lying peacefully beside Max, his eyes closed in a relaxed state. A strange warmth filled her heart as she watched him. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that one day his wild side would resurface, and they would have to face what it meant to live with a wild creature in their home. Would they still be able to protect each other when that time came? The tension in the room was thick. Clara looked at Leo, still resting on the couch, her heart heavy with a mixture of love and concern. "I've been doing some reading about tigers," she said softly, her gaze never leaving the cub. "I don't know if I can be at peace keeping him here long term. I read that, despite being strong and resilient, tigers need to live in their natural habitat, especially a tiger like Leo. He might not survive in a family environment for long." Tom stared at Leo, his mind racing. "I understand," he said after a pause, his voice steady but thoughtful. "But maybe we can find a way. I feel like Leo has become a part of us, and our family won't give him up easily." Clara remained silent, her eyes filled with a distant uncertainty. She couldn't help but love Leo, but she feared what might happen when this little cub grew up and his wild instincts came roaring to the surface. "I hope so," she whispered, "but we need to be ready for whatever comes." Each day, Tom carefully recorded Leo's behavior, but he couldn't deny that the tiger was changing far faster than he had expected. It was no longer just a matter of Leo surviving. He was becoming part of their family. The concern in Tom and Clara's hearts only grew, though, because Leo was no longer the wild tiger they had found. He was adapting too quickly, and it felt like his wild side was being buried beneath the domesticated behaviors he was mimicking. One morning, as Leo played with Rex and Max outside, Clara stood by the window, her hands clenched at her sides. She watched Leo run, his movements fluid and carefree, even letting out a low growl as he wrestled with Max like a puppy. But it wasn't just his playful nature that caught her attention. It was the fact that Leo was growing stronger, his body becoming more muscular and powerful with each passing day. These changes made Clara uneasy. She couldn't help but wonder, what would happen when Leo grew into this strength? Could they keep him at home without putting themselves in danger? She sighed deeply and turned to look at Tom, who was sitting at the table writing in his notebook. "What do you think? Can we keep him here?" Tom looked up from his writing, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that too. Leo has become part of the family, but I can't ignore that this tiger won't stay the same. He's going to get stronger, and his wild instincts are going to surface." Clara walked over to the window, her eyes following Leo as he played with Max. She couldn't help but worry about what would happen when Leo grew up, when his physical changes and wild instincts could cause him to lose control. Don't you think we're creating a potential danger for ourselves? If he grows strong enough and attacks when we least expect it, everything could change so quickly. Tom looked out at Leo, his face shadowed with concern. I know, Clara, Leo's not a regular pet. I can't ignore his wild instincts. But we saved him. We gave him a chance to fit into this family. I can't just send him back to the wild. He's too familiar with us now. Clara turned to face him, her eyes filled with resolve. We can't keep him like this forever, Tom. I know how much you love Leo, but we have to think about the safety of our family. Can we really take care of a full-grown tiger without endangering ourselves? Tom stood up, walking over to Clara and placing a hand on her shoulder. I know, Clara. I don't want to risk anything either. But if we can, we'll find a way to give Leo his own space, somewhere where he can live comfortably without causing harm to anyone. Either way, he's part of this family now. Clara looked at him, her eyes softening. I know we can't keep Leo forever, but I won't just let him go. For me, Leo is part of this life now. Still, I'll always worry about him. We'll do everything we can to create a safe space for him, Clara, I promise, Tom replied, his voice quieter now, as if lost in thought. The days had been getting heavier. Every time Leo played around the yard with Rex and Max, the family felt the growing sense that Leo was no longer just a wild animal. He was changing, becoming stronger, faster, and more confident. His tiger instincts were still there, but they seemed buried beneath his new life with the family. Clara's worries, though, continued to grow. Don't you see it, Tom? Leo's not just a little tiger anymore. He's growing so quickly, and his wild instincts won't be kept in check forever. Her hands clenched tighter, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want to live in fear that one day he won't be the gentle cub we saved, that he'll turn into something dangerous. Tom looked at Leo, now lying next to Max, his fur thicker and showing signs of maturity. He knew the day would come when Leo would no longer be just a cub. But the bond between Leo, Lena, Clara, and himself had grown so strong that the decision was becoming harder. I understand, Tom said quietly. But can we really send him back to the wild after he's become part of our family? He's changed. He's not the same wild animal we found anymore. Clara paused, her eyes focused on Leo, then back to Tom. I know Leo can't stay with us forever, but can we make the right decision now that he's part of this family? When I look at Leo, I don't just see a tiger. I see a life we saved and have lived with for so long. I can't just abandon him. Tom could feel the determination in Clara's voice. He understood that she was struggling inside, torn between her love for Leo and the growing concern for their family's safety as the tiger cub became stronger. But the bond they had created with him made the decision unbearably difficult. We can't keep Leo here forever, Tom sighed. But is there any way we can create a safe environment for him? Somewhere he can be free without putting us in danger? Clara hesitated, then turned her gaze to Leo, who was resting next to Rex and Max. I think we could build a separate area for Leo, a spacious and secure place where he can grow without threatening our family. But is that fair to Leo? Will he feel abandoned if he's no longer close to us? Tom walked over and gently placed his hand on Clara's shoulder. I understand you. I'm worried too about how Leo will feel. But I think if we let him return to the wild, at least he'll live the way he was meant to, like a true tiger. We've given him a chance, and now we have to do what's right for him. Clara remained silent, her eyes fixed on Leo. She felt a surge of pity for him, but she also understood that the family had to accept what had come. Leo had become part of their lives, but at the same time, his wild instincts couldn't be confined forever within the walls of their home. I don't want to lose Leo, Clara whispered. But I know we can't keep him forever. We have to think about his future. Tom nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I don't want to let him go either. But we have to do what's right for Leo. I promise we'll figure this out. Clara tightened her grip on Tom's hand, then turned to look at Leo one last time. Though her heart ached, she knew this was a decision they couldn't avoid. Leo had grown, and Clara could feel it in her bones. He was no longer the gentle cub they had rescued from the snowstorm. Now he was a powerful creature, his wild instincts undeniable. Despite the deep love she had for him, Clara understood that there was a line they couldn't cross as a family. The phone on the table suddenly buzzed, breaking the silence in the room. Tom reached for it, his eyes narrowing as he saw the caller ID. On the other end of the line, a cold, official voice informed him that the Wildlife Protection Agency required Leo to be transferred immediately. Tom, this is an official request from the Wildlife Protection Center. Leo has matured and is starting to display behaviors typical of a wild tiger. This increases the risk of an incident, and we cannot allow a wild animal like that to continue living in a family environment. We require Leo to be transferred to a wildlife sanctuary immediately, the voice on the phone said, devoid of emotion. Tom's heart sank. He looked at Clara, who was standing beside him, her face a mixture of shock and sorrow. They had known this moment might come, but hearing it aloud made the reality hit harder than they had imagined. The weight of Clara's words hung heavy in the air, her voice filled with the kind of quiet agony that only a mother could understand. She knew, deep down, what needed to be done. But the pain of letting go, of sending away the creature they had saved, was almost too much to bear. "We can't keep Leo here forever," Tom sighed, his voice thick with the same sorrow that filled the room. "But is there any way we can create a safe space for him, a place where he can be free without putting us in danger?" Clara hesitated, her eyes following Leo, who was lying beside Rex and Max, his powerful form a sharp reminder of how much he had grown. "I think we could build a separate area for Leo, a large, secure space where he can thrive without putting the family at risk. But is that really fair to him? Will he feel abandoned if he's no longer near us?" Tom stepped closer to Clara, placing a hand on her shoulder, his gaze soft but resolute. "I understand how you feel. I'm worried too about how Leo will feel. But if we let him go back to the wild, at least he'll be able to live the way he was meant to, like a real tiger. We gave him a chance, and now we have to do what's right for him." Clara didn't respond immediately. She stood there, gazing at Leo, her heart torn between the love she had for him and the harsh reality of what they had to do. She had given Leo a chance, but now, as he grew stronger and wilder, she knew that the time had come to let him go. "I don't want to lose Leo," Clara whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "But I know we can't keep him here forever. We have to think about his future." Tom nodded, the heaviness of her words settling deep within him. "I don't want to let him go either, but we have to do what's best for Leo. I promise we'll find a way." Clara tightened her grip on Tom's hand, turning back to look at Leo one last time. Although her heart ached, she knew that the time had come for them to face the truth. Leo had grown, and with each passing day, Clara could feel the weight of the change. He was no longer the gentle cub they had found in the snowstorm. Now he was a strong creature, with wild instincts that could no longer be ignored. Clara's love for him was undeniable, but she also knew that there was a point where the family could no longer keep him. The phone on the table buzzed suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. Tom reached for it, his face tense as he glanced at the screen. A cold, official voice on the other end informed him that the Wildlife Protection Agency required Leo to be transferred immediately. "Tom, this is an official request from the Wildlife Protection Center. Leo has matured and is beginning to display behaviors typical of a wild tiger. This increases the risk of an incident, and we cannot allow a wild animal like that to continue living in a family environment. We require Leo to be transferred to a wildlife sanctuary immediately, the voice said, devoid of emotion. Tom's heart sank, his grip tightening on the phone. He turned to look at Clara, who stood beside him, her face pale with shock. They had known this moment might come, but hearing it out loud made the reality of it all so much more painful. Clara's gaze fell to Leo, who was lying quietly on the couch. He had grown so much, his fur glossy and thick, his muscles powerful. He was no longer the tiny cub they had rescued. He was a tiger, and his wild nature was undeniable. Tom stood motionless for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew it was the right thing to do, but it didn't make it any easier. He had grown so attached to Leo, and the thought of sending him away felt like a piece of him was being ripped away. "Do you think we can really do this, Clara?" Tom asked, his voice softer than before. Clara turned away from Leo, her eyes clouded with worry. "I've been thinking about it. We've given Leo a chance, but now, he's not the cub we saved. He's become a true wild tiger. He needs to be free." Tom's heart ached at her words, but he knew she was right. They had tried to make Leo part of their family, but he was never meant to live in a house. He was meant to roam the wild, to be free, to live as a tiger. "We've given him a life," Tom said quietly, "but now he needs to live it the way he was meant to. We can't keep him here forever." Clara sighed, her hand resting on the window pane as she looked out at the snow falling gently outside. The peaceful sight did nothing to soothe the turmoil in her heart. "I know it's the right thing to do. But how do I let go of him, Tom? How do I say goodbye to the tiger that's become a part of our family?" Tom stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "We'll find a way to make it right. Leo has to go back to the wild. He belongs there, but that doesn't mean we forget about him. He's always been a part of us." Clara nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "I just don't know how I'll be able to watch him go." Tom took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's the hardest thing we've ever had to do, but it's the right thing. We'll make sure he's safe. We'll always remember him." And with that, they both knew what had to be done. Leo had to be free, but the love they had for him would never fade. Clara turned back, looking at Leo for the last time. A deep sadness overwhelmed her heart. She walked over to Tom, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I understand. But why does it still hurt so much?" Tom smiled softly, though his eyes were filled with regret. "I feel the same, Clara. But sometimes, doing the right thing is the hardest thing." Clara gazed at Leo, lying quietly beside Rex and Max. He wasn't the small, fragile cub they had rescued anymore. He had become a strong, wild creature, and Clara could no longer ignore the untamed energy in his eyes. Her heart ached with the sorrow of knowing that the bond they had with Leo couldn't last forever. He had been a part of their lives, but now he needed to be free. They couldn't hold him back any longer. "Tom, do you think we're doing the right thing?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "We've raised him, loved him, watched him grow. How can I just let him go when he's become such an important part of our family?" Tom stood silent, feeling the same ache in his chest. He knew that as much as they had loved Leo, his wild instincts had to take precedence. "We've done everything we could for him, Clara. We gave him a chance to live, but now it's time for him to go back to the wild. He needs to live like the tiger he is." Clara's heart broke, but she understood. Leo needed to return to nature. He had to live the life he was born to live, free from the constraints of a human home. But the thought of saying goodbye to the tiger who had become a part of their family was too much to bear. "I don't want to lose him," Clara said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. But I know we can't keep him here forever. He needs to be free. Tom nodded solemnly, his hand gently squeezing hers. We'll make sure Leo is free, Clara. We'll always remember him, but we can't keep him in the house forever. We need to let him go for his own sake. Clara's heart ached as she looked at Leo. She had raised him, cared for him, watched him change from a helpless cub into a powerful creature. But now, the time had come for him to return to where he belonged. The next day, the family prepared for Leo to leave. Clara packed his things, even though the thought of saying goodbye filled her with dread. Tom arranged everything with the wildlife sanctuary, where Leo would be taken. As the family stood together, looking at Leo one last time, they all felt the deep loss. This wasn't just about sending him away. It was a part of their family leaving them. Clara walked into the living room, where Leo lay quietly on the old rug. Rex and Max sat nearby, glancing at the tiger, their eyes showing an unfamiliar sadness as if they too understood what was coming. Clara sat beside Leo, stroking his thick fur, feeling the warmth of his body. It was a moment she couldn't bear, but one she knew was inevitable. I can't let him go, Tom. How can I? Clara sighed, her voice soft but full of pain. She looked at Leo, the tiger they had saved, the tiger who had become part of their family. Leo was no longer just a wild animal. He was family. And now, they had to let him go. Tom stood by the door, his hand gripping the bag they had prepared for Leo. He looked at Clara, understanding the agony she felt. I don't want to let him go either, Clara. But you know Leo is a wild animal. We can't keep him here forever. This is the right thing to do. We have to let him go. Clara turned back to Leo, her eyes filled with tears. You're right, Tom. But how can I just accept that? Leo has been with us for so long, and now looking at him, he's not just a tiger. He's ours. Tom walked over and sat beside her, his eyes filled with sorrow but also determination. I know, Clara. I love Leo too. But we can't keep him in the house forever. If we do, his wild instincts will come back, and it could be dangerous. It's better for him to live free, to be the tiger he was meant to be. Clara bit her lip, watching Leo sleep peacefully beside Max. She knew Tom was right. She knew Leo's wild nature couldn't stay hidden forever. But the love she felt for him made it impossible to let go. She had raised him, cared for him, and now she had to send him away. But why the sanctuary? How can we just let him go like this? He's not the wild animal we found in the woods. He's part of our family. How can we just stand by and watch him leave? Clara said, her voice breaking. Tom looked at Clara, the pain in his own heart reflected in his eyes. We've given him a chance. We've loved him, cared for him, but Leo belongs in the wild. We can't hold on to him forever, Clara. He needs to live where he belongs. Clara was silent, her eyes full of sorrow as she looked at Leo. She understood that Tom was right, but her heart refused to let go. Every moment they had shared with Leo, the joy, the bond, was now a memory. And yet the truth remained that Leo needed the wild. He couldn't stay in their home, no matter how much they loved him. Are we doing the right thing, Tom? Clara asked, her voice full of doubt. Can we be sure that sending him back to the wild is the right decision? Tom paused, his voice low and firm. We've done everything we can to protect him, Clara. We can't keep him here forever. He needs to be free, and that's where he belongs. Clara stared at Leo, her heart heavy with the burden of what they had to do. She knew it was the right choice, but it didn't make it any easier. Leo had become a part of their family, and now they had to say goodbye. Lena stood quietly in the doorway, watching her parents. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a determination in her gaze that matched her parents'. She had been part of this journey, and like Tom and Clara, she knew Leo's place wasn't here anymore. Tom walked over to Clara and Lena, his hand resting gently on Lena's shoulder. "We'll remember Leo, and we'll make sure he has the life he deserves. This is the hardest thing we've ever had to do, but we'll make sure it's right for him." As Clara stood there, the tears continued to fall. She knew this was the right decision, but it didn't make it any less painful. Leo had been a part of their lives, and now they had to let him go. She hugged Lena tightly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over them all. Leo, though a wild animal, had become a part of their family. And in this moment, it was time to say goodbye, no matter how much it hurt. The whole family walked with Leo to the garden, where the transport truck was waiting. Leo looked back at them one last time, his bright eyes full of unspoken questions. Tom furrowed his brow, unable to say another word. Taking Leo to the sanctuary was the only way for the tiger to live out his wild instincts. But it also meant saying goodbye, an unavoidable farewell. As the truck began to pull away, Lena ran up and took Leo's paw, her throat tightening with emotion. "Goodbye, Leo," she whispered, her voice catching. "I'll always remember you." She turned to see Rex and Max standing quietly by her side, their eyes full of understanding, as if they, too, knew that a member of their family was about to leave. Clara took Lena's hand, but the worry and sorrow in her heart couldn't be shaken. "We loved him, and that's what matters," she said softly. "But now, you have to let him go." Tom looked at the truck, where Leo was being transferred to the sanctuary. He sighed deeply, his heart heavy. "This is the hardest decision of my life, but Leo will be free, and that's where he truly belongs." Clara stood beside Tom, feeling as though his words couldn't soothe the ache in her heart. She watched the truck slowly pull away, feeling like a part of their family was leaving forever. Leo, the tiger they had saved, who had become so deeply woven into the fabric of their lives, would now return to the wild where he truly belonged. But that night, when the farewell could no longer be avoided, something unexpected happened. Leo, the strong tiger they had nurtured, made the decision to leave on his own. Outside, everything was quiet, the darkness of the garden settling around them as Tom and Clara slept. Leo quietly rose from the bed the family had made for him. There was a powerful, undeniable pull in his heart. Even though he had lived in their home, even though he had shared so many happy days with Max, Rex, and the family, there was a call from deep within him, one he couldn't ignore. It was the call of his wild instincts, and it was louder than anything else. Without a sound, Leo stepped off the warm bed and padded outside, his eyes bright in the darkness, his ears alert. Leo was not a confused animal, not a dreamer. He was a true wild creature, one who had lived among humans but always sensed the freedom waiting for him outside. Silently, Leo walked through the garden, past the birch trees where he had first been found, abandoned. He didn't look back at the house, because his instincts had already led him. The night was still, but Leo's mind was filled with a strange sense of strength. He knew he had to leave the warmth of his family behind to find what belonged to him. Tom woke up in the middle of the night, an uneasy feeling gnawing at him. He walked outside, searching the garden, but Leo was nowhere to be found. Anxiety crept into his chest, but he had no idea that, at that very moment, Leo was running through the birch forest, leaving behind the family that had cared for him all these months. All through the night, Leo moved quietly along the familiar forest paths, passing through the lands he had once walked with his family. With each step, Leo felt the freedom he had been searching for, a release from the bonds of life with humans. His steps were strong, confident, his eyes shining like a flame in the night. For Leo, this decision wasn't abandoning his family. It was a return to his instincts. He felt that the time spent in the house could never define the path he needed to walk. Even though the love from his family was immense, Leo knew this journey was his alone. It was his journey to find himself. Clara and Tom had no idea that, as they anxiously searched for Leo, the tiger had already begun a long, dangerous journey, a journey that would take him through forests, across rivers, and face to face with wild animals and other dangers, all leading him to the place where he truly belonged. Every step Leo took was a step into a world completely different from the one he had known. One without the protection of humans. A world where he had to rely on his wild instincts to survive. Leo dove into the dense forest, the thick trees and falling leaves crunching beneath his paws. Each step was a challenge, as the dense canopy above blocked out most of the light, making the space around him dark and uncertain. Branches, dry twigs, and sharp thorns caught in his thick fur, but Leo didn't seem to mind. He pressed forward, his bright eyes alert, his ears tuned to every sound around him. He knew that to survive, he had to stay sharp, to hold on to his strength. Even when Leo had to stop to untangle himself from the brambles or climb over large rocks, he never faltered. The fatigue didn't slow him down. Instead, each hardship seemed to make Leo stronger. Facing the thick forest, the rushing rivers, Leo felt a burning determination rising inside him. He didn't turn back. With each step, he drew closer to freedom, closer to his true home in the wild. After 3 days of travel, Leo came upon a large river, its powerful current rushing downstream. Large rocks lay scattered in the water, forming obstacles that Leo had to cross. He watched the water cascade over the rocks, carrying everything in its path. Leo paused to assess the situation, but he didn't hesitate. With the instincts of a hunter, Leo chose a safe spot, where the water wasn't too deep or fast. He waded into the cold, fast-moving stream. The water was freezing and strong, but Leo swam with persistence, each stroke propelling him across the wide river. Once across, Leo didn't rest. He pressed forward, determined. Along the way, he encountered sudden heavy rains. The drops fell fast and hard, soaking his thick fur, making him even more tired. But Leo wasn't afraid of the rain. He knew that no matter how hard the rain fell or how fierce the winds blew, as long as he kept moving forward, he would reach his goal. The rain was just another challenge nature had placed before him, and Leo had learned to face it without ever backing down. The weariness crept in as Leo moved through a rocky, uneven stretch of land. But the tiger didn't pause. Every ache from past wounds, every tired muscle only pushed Leo to continue. He found natural signs along the way, birds flying overhead, small prey scurrying through the bushes, and Leo followed them. Each step, each paw print, Leo knew he was getting closer to where he truly belonged. Back home, Tom and Clara could only watch anxiously, glued to the GPS as red dots moved across the map, stretching through rivers and forests. The lines kept changing, and with each update, their worry deepened. Every step Leo took was a step toward freedom, but for Tom and Clara, it was a constant source of dread. Would Leo be able to face all the dangers that lay ahead? Yet, as they watched the screen, they couldn't deny the strength and resilience Leo had shown. Despite the exhaustion, despite the challenges, Leo kept going. He didn't slow down, didn't rest. He only had one goal: to return to the wild, to find where he truly belonged. But the journey was not easy. One of the biggest challenges Leo faced came when he found himself in a life-or-death struggle with a full-grown bear in the vast wilderness. Night fell, and Leo pressed on through the dense forest. The trees towered overhead, thick bushes grew high, and the only light came from the weak glow of the moon. Despite his weariness, Leo kept his pace, but the stillness of the forest didn't last long. As he moved deeper into a more open area, a deep, rumbling sound broke the silence, and in an instant, Leo sensed a massive presence moving closer. The bear emerged from the shadows, its eyes fierce, its massive body cutting through the trees. Leo froze immediately, his sharp eyes locked on the bear's, calculating every move. Leo wasn't seeking a fight, but the bear felt threatened. Its growls echoed in the forest, charging the air with tension. Leo knew that if he didn't act, the bear wouldn't let him leave unharmed. In that moment, Leo knew this wasn't a fight he wanted, but his survival instincts took over, forcing him to face his enemy. He squared his shoulders, eyes blazing with determination, lowering himself like a predator ready to pounce. The bear, seeing Leo move, charged at him, and suddenly both creatures were locked in a brutal struggle, each trying to overpower the other. Leo dodged the bear's first swipe, his strong legs propelling him out of the way. But the bear wasn't backing down, attacking with the strength and ferocity of a true predator. Leo had to fight not just with strength, but with the sharpness of his mind, keeping his focus while defending himself. The sounds of their battle echoed through the trees, growls, roars, and the heavy thud of paws on the ground. Tom and Clara could do nothing but watch, tears in their eyes, as the red dot on the GPS showed Leo's struggle. Every second felt like an eternity, and they were gripped with fear, praying that Leo would make it out of this alive. The fight lasted for what seemed like forever, but to Leo, each second dragged on. He fought not just with muscle, but with every instinct he had. Finally, with one decisive swipe, Leo grabbed hold of the bear's arm, using the strength of his powerful back legs to push the bear away. The bear roared, stumbled, and finally ran off into the forest, leaving Leo standing, exhausted but unbroken. Leo stood there, panting heavily, his fur matted with sweat and blood from the battle. But there was no fear, no pain in his eyes. Instead, there was an unyielding resolve, a fire that burned brighter than ever. Leo had proven, once again, that no matter the challenge, he could overcome it. As Clara watched the screen, she saw the red dot move again, and a wave of relief washed over her. The fight with the bear had been terrifying, but Leo had kept going, and that was all the family needed to keep believing in him, the tiger they had saved. With each movement of the red dot on the map, Clara and Tom felt a flicker of hope, even as their worry never fully left them. They knew Leo still faced many challenges, that his journey was far from over. Tom sat next to Clara, his eyes locked on the phone screen, the tension palpable in the air. Neither of them could look away from the map, each update deepening their anxiety. The fear of the unknown haunted them, but they couldn't stop watching. They needed to know how Leo was doing. What if something went wrong? What if he didn't make it? "Do you think Leo will face another challenge soon?" Clara asked, her voice filled with concern. Tom sighed, shaking his head. "We can't predict it, Clara. But we have to trust him. We have to believe in his strength and his determination. I know that no matter what he faces, Leo will keep fighting." But even as Tom said those words, a part of him was filled with fear. They had watched Leo leave their family that first day, and every passing moment made their worry grow. When Leo crossed rivers and thick forests, when he navigated busy highways, all they could do was wait and hope. With every passing minute, Clara and Tom couldn't tear their eyes away from the GPS map. Leo moved quickly across different areas, and Tom noticed every small change in his location. But every time Leo encountered a challenge, big or small, the worry surged again. When Leo reached a large river, neither Tom nor Clara could breathe easy until they saw him cross safely and continue his journey. Clara had cried in those moments, but as Leo moved forward, a sense of comfort washed over her. Yet when Leo approached a busy highway, their fear returned. The cars sped by, and Leo had to find a way through. Each second felt like a battle, and Tom couldn't stop himself from tightening his grip on Clara's hand, his heart racing faster. "Leo will make it, right?" Clara asked, staring at the screen, knowing that Tom couldn't give her an answer. Tom looked at the screen, his eyes full of resolve. "I believe he will, Clara. He's already faced so much, and he'll keep going." Clara closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then opened them again, watching Leo continue his journey across the highway. The moments were tense, stretching on, until finally Leo crossed the road safely, without a scratch. The family collectively exhaled. Tom glanced at Clara, his tired smile full of hope. "He made it again, didn't he?" Clara nodded, her silent tears falling once more. "Maybe we were wrong to worry so much. Leo really is strong." Every time Leo faced a challenge, a little piece of anxiety lifted from Clara and Tom's hearts. Though the worry still gnawed at them, they couldn't deny the strength Leo displayed with every step. This feeling, the resilience of Leo, brought new hope to their family. They believed now, more than ever, that their tiger could overcome anything to return home. Clara sighed, staring at the screen of her phone, then looked back at Tom. "See? He's coming back to us. We have to believe in Leo." Tom nodded, gripping her hand tightly. "I believe too, and we'll wait until he comes home." But the worry didn't let go of them. Every shift in Leo's position on the GPS map kept Clara and Tom on edge. As Leo moved through vast forests and quiet roads, they both worried about the challenges ahead. But today, they were facing a challenge they never imagined, a large river with a strong current, one that made them fear for Leo. "Leo's approaching a big river," Clara said, her voice laced with concern. "The water's too strong. If he's not careful." Tom watched the screen, a sense of anxiety creeping in. The red dot marking Leo on the map paused near the riverbank, as if he was hesitating. Tom sighed, unsure if Leo had the strength and determination to overcome this challenge. He tightened his grip on Clara's hand, silently hoping that Leo would be safe. "What do we do now?" Clara asked, her voice thick with worry. Tom glanced at Leo on the screen, his eyes full of determination and hope. "We can only watch. Leo's overcome so many challenges already. I believe he can do this." And then, almost as if in response to their concern, Leo began to move towards the riverbank. The water was rushing fiercely, waves crashing against the shore, making the situation even more dangerous. Leo didn't hesitate. He paused for a moment, studying the water, and then, with a powerful leap, he plunged into the river. Clara and Tom couldn't take their eyes off the screen. They saw Leo swimming through the rushing water, his strong legs paddling fiercely as he fought to hold on to the current. Clara couldn't stop the surge of fear she felt, watching Leo face this powerful river. Could he make it? The water was unforgiving, but Leo didn't give up. He swam with unwavering strength, showing no signs of weakness or fear. Watching Leo cut through the water, it was clear. He was a wild creature, driven by pure strength and survival instinct. The waves kept crashing into him, but he never faltered. Tom couldn't look away, his heart racing, terrified that Leo might be swept away. But at the same time, he couldn't help but feel immense pride in Leo's strength and determination. "Leo's going to make it!" Tom shouted, as if encouraging the tiger. He watched the screen, seeing Leo press on, steadily moving toward the other side of the river. After what seemed like an eternity battling the turbulent waters, Leo finally made it to the far side of the river. Clara exhaled, her tears flowing freely down her face, but they were tears of pride and joy. He did it. He really did it. Tom looked at Clara, his eyes filled with emotion. He's stronger than we ever thought. In that moment, as Leo crossed the great river, the family felt something shift in Leo's journey. Each challenge Leo overcame made the family believe more in the tiger they had saved. No matter how harsh the challenges ahead, Leo had shown them that he wasn't just a wild tiger. He was a creature of incredible strength, determination, and resolve. And he would never give up. After crossing the river, Leo didn't stop to rest. Tom and Clara kept watching through the GPS, seeing Leo continue moving, heading toward a busy highway. The cars sped by, like a river of metal beasts tearing through the wind. This sight made Tom and Clara worry once more. "The highway is too busy. Leo can't just cross that easily," Clara said, her voice heavy with unease. Tom sighed, his eyes still fixed on the phone screen. "I know. Leo's never faced something like this before, but he's a wild tiger, with the instincts of a hunter. Maybe he'll figure it out." Clara didn't say anything else, just staring at the screen, her eyes filled with tension. The feeling of worry crept up again in their hearts. Leo was still moving, slowly making his way toward the highway where the cars rushed by. No matter how strong Leo was, how could he possibly cross a road full of vehicles and danger like that? As Leo neared the entrance to the highway, Tom and Clara couldn't tear their eyes away from the screen. The cars zoomed past at dizzying speeds. Each vehicle, each lane, seemed like an impossible obstacle for a wild creature like Leo. But then, to Clara and Tom's surprise, Leo didn't show any fear. The tiger paused for a moment, observing the situation closely. He didn't rush into the road without thinking. Leo's eyes were focused, locked onto each passing car. He knew that if he didn't time this right, one mistake could cost him everything. A gap between the lanes appeared, and in that moment Leo didn't hesitate. With powerful instincts, he calculated the distance and timing, then moved. Tom and Clara held their breath, not daring to make a sound as they watched Leo step into the highway. Each step Leo took was deliberate, calculated. The tiger didn't rush out recklessly. He waited, patiently. His eyes never left the vehicles, and with every step, he found a space, a gap where he could move safely. Leo moved carefully between the lanes, his every step calculated like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. His pace was quick but cautious, knowing that one wrong move could cost him everything. Tom and Clara were glued to their phones. Every second passing felt like an eternity, like a battle they couldn't win. But finally Leo had made it across the highway. Clara let out a relieved breath. "He's doing it. He'll make it." And just like that, Leo crossed the highway safely. Tom and Clara both exhaled, but the tension didn't completely vanish. They still couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Leo wasn't just a wild tiger. He was strong, resilient, determined to face whatever the journey threw at him. "Leo really is strong," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think he'd make it across so easily." Clara smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with pride. "He did it. Leo's not like any tiger I've ever known." The feeling of pride mixed with anxiety lingered in their hearts. Leo had continued his journey and overcome another fierce obstacle. Even though they'd seen his strength, they knew his journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, harder ones, but with each victory, Leo's spirit made them believe more in his ability to return home. Then, just as they were feeling a flicker of hope, the GPS map showed Leo entering an area Tom and Clara hadn't expected. A wilderness teeming with predators like foxes, wolves, and other wild creatures. The realization hit them like a punch in the gut. Leo was moving into a dangerous place where he could easily encounter fierce animals. "There's definitely danger ahead," Clara said, her voice filled with worry as she stared at the screen. Leo's faced big challenges before, but these wild animals are different. They're not like the ones we know. Tom nodded, his eyes not leaving the phone. "I know. We can only watch and hope Leo overcomes whatever comes his way, but there's no avoiding some of these encounters." Leo walked deeper into the thick forest, where the light barely reached the ground, and the sounds of wild creatures echoed all around. The scent of predators filled the air, heightening the tension. Leo moved silently, his eyes scanning the surroundings, alert to every sign. Then, suddenly, a noise from behind made him stop dead in his tracks. A large fox emerged from the shadows, its sharp eyes locking onto Leo's. Leo froze, his ears perked, his body tense. The fox, with its bright red fur and lithe body, wasn't afraid as it drew closer, seemingly testing Leo. Leo didn't flinch. He understood that this was an encounter he couldn't avoid. His territorial instincts kicked in. He moved forward, meeting the fox head-on like a warrior preparing for battle. Leo wasn't planning to strike immediately, but if the fox made a move, Leo wouldn't hesitate. The fox, sensing Leo's unwavering resolve, let out a low growl before turning and retreating into the darkness. Leo stood still, watching the fox leave, his gaze never wavering. It was a small victory, but Leo knew he couldn't underestimate the dangers that lay ahead. Soon, Leo pressed on, but another challenge awaited. A pack of wolves emerged from the forest, their eyes glowing in the dark, sensing Leo's presence from a distance. They moved with the precision and swiftness of true predators, closing in on him. This time Leo didn't hesitate. Standing tall, his coat gleaming in the moonlight, he let out a powerful growl. The wolves stopped in their tracks, but they didn't retreat. They hesitated, eyeing Leo with caution, unsure of the formidable tiger before them. Leo growled again, and slowly the wolves began to back off. One of them turned and ran, signaling to the rest that Leo wasn't a foe to be taken lightly. After those tense encounters, Leo continued on, showing relentless perseverance. Despite the minor injuries from the battles, Leo didn't stop. Each victory, no matter how small, made him stronger and more confident as he walked, unafraid. Tom and Clara couldn't help but worry, but deep down, they felt an overwhelming pride for their tiger. They knew Leo wasn't just any wild animal. He was a warrior, ready to face whatever dangers life in the wild threw his way. The strength and resilience Leo showed on his journey deepened their faith in his return, even though the road ahead was still long and full of uncertainty. The next morning, Tom and Clara woke up early, as they always did, to check Leo's position through GPS. Each day that passed, they followed his journey closely, worried for him, but filled with hope. When Tom opened the digital map, the red dot marking Leo was still moving, steadily heading toward a place near home. "He's definitely coming back here," Clara said, her voice soft but laced with concern. "But it'll still take some time." Tom nodded, silent, though his heart was a mix of worry and anticipation. Part of him believed Leo would return, but another part still feared that they might never see their tiger again. Then, one late afternoon, as the sky was painted red with the setting sun, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. Leo, covered in dust and with his eyes still sharp, emerged from the dense brush. His body was tired, but he walked with the unwavering strength of a warrior who had survived countless trials. Rex and Max, as if sensing Leo's presence from a distance, ran toward him immediately. They didn't need another second to recognize that their tiger had returned. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Leo and the two dogs rushed toward each other, the joy in their reunion unspoken but deeply felt. Tom and Clara were overcome with emotion, watching as their dogs and Leo, once a wild tiger, came together again after such a long separation. No words could capture the power of that moment. The reunion of a wild creature and two loyal companions of family and survival was everything they had hoped for and more. Rex jumped up, wagging his tail and running in circles around Leo as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Max, just as excited, barked happily and sprinted towards Leo, almost wanting to hug the tiger. Leo didn't flinch or show any sign of fear. Instead, he gently lay down, wagging his tail, as if he had come back to his family. Clara watched the reunion with tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe it. Leo's back," she said, her voice choking with happiness. Tom couldn't speak, just standing there with tears in his eyes. A wave of joy surged in his chest. No matter the obstacles, Leo had come back, reunited with the family. This moment made him believe that good things come to those who dare to love and protect one another. Rex and Max came closer, their faces bright with uncontainable smiles. Leo looked at them, his eyes full of understanding, as if he knew, deep down, that this was his family. In that moment, Leo was no longer just a wild tiger. He was family. Tom and Clara couldn't stop looking at each other, their hearts full of happiness. This was the moment they knew that Leo had come home, not just to the house, but to the people who loved him. Tom stepped closer to Leo, gently stroking the tiger's thick fur. "I knew you'd come back," Tom said, his voice full of emotion. "We never gave up on you." Clara stepped forward, placing her hand on Leo's head and gently petting him. "We love you, Leo. You're a part of this family." Leo looked at Tom and Clara, his eyes deep and full of connection. Nothing could change the bond he shared with them. And from that moment on, Leo was officially back with his family, surrounded by all the love and safety he needed. Leo wasn't just the tiger they had saved. He was a special being they would protect with all their hearts. Although Leo's journey had been full of hardships, everything felt renewed when he returned. His presence in the family wasn't simple anymore. He wasn't just a wild tiger. He was a creature with powerful instincts and a unique spirit. Tom and Clara didn't just take care of Leo. They learned more about him every day, understanding his natural needs and deep emotions. Leo began to reintegrate into the family naturally. Each day, he grew closer to Rex and Max, the two dogs who had once been his companions. Whenever Rex and Max played, Leo joined in, though at first his clumsiness made the play a bit awkward. But over time, Leo learned to play more smoothly, even in simple games like fetch or rolling around together. Clara and Tom noticed a change in Leo. He wasn't as wild as he used to be, but he hadn't lost his instincts. He still maintained the independence and strength of a tiger, but he had become an essential part of their family. The love Leo felt for them was undisturbed by the differences between humans and animals. Every morning, Leo would head to the garden with Rex and Max. Sometimes he'd just sit there in the sun, occasionally turning his head to look back at the family with gratitude in his eyes. At night, when the family gathered together, Leo lay at Tom and Clara's feet, like a child seeking comfort in the arms of his parents. This simple scene moved Clara and Tom deeply, as they realized that even though Leo was a wild tiger, he still knew how to love and bond with his family in his own way. Feeling the need to protect and care for Leo, Clara and Tom began to plan for a larger living space for him. Clara researched safe, natural environments suitable for a tiger like Leo. They decided to build a spacious area on their property, where Leo could roam freely but still remain safe with the family. Tom started drawing up designs and calculating the budget, making sure Leo could keep his wild instincts while being protected. "What do you think we should do to make Leo comfortable but still preserve his wild instincts?" Clara asked, looking at the design Tom was sketching for Leo's new living space. Tom thought for a moment and then replied, "We'll make it spacious, enough room for him to move freely. But we also need to make sure he's not isolated. Even though he's a wild tiger, he still needs to feel the love and protection of the family. Clara nodded in agreement. We can't let Leo become a solitary creature. He's part of this family now. Building Leo's living space was an important decision for Tom and his family. They wanted Leo to have enough room to maintain his wild instincts, but they also wanted him to feel the love and care they had for him. Leo's relationship with the family grew deeper every day as they realized that taking care of him wasn't just about protecting him, it was about creating an environment where he could thrive. With new plans for Leo, the family felt a renewed sense of hope. They knew their relationship with Leo would never be the same, but it was a relationship that couldn't be replaced, and they would always do everything they could to protect and keep him in the world where he belonged. The mix of pride and worry continued to follow the family as they moved forward with their plans, knowing they were providing Leo with the best life they could. Although Leo had been raised in their home for a long time, Tom and Clara understood that keeping him in their house long-term wasn't possible. The tiger needed more space, a place where he could live freely while still ensuring the family's safety. Tom and Clara knew this decision wasn't simple, but they both agreed it was the right one, to create a space that was safe and suitable for Leo's wild nature. Tom sat down at the table, beginning to sketch out a plan for Leo's new living area. We need to build a really spacious space for Leo. He needs enough room to move, but it also has to be safe. We need to plan carefully so we not only protect him, but also let him feel free. Rex leapt up, tail wagging wildly, running in circles around Leo as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Max wasn't far behind, barking happily, then sprinting over to Leo as though he wanted to wrap his paws around the tiger. Leo didn't show any fear, no instinct to defend himself. He simply lowered himself gently to the ground, tail swaying like he had returned home to his family. Clara watched the reunion, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe it! Leo's back," she said, her voice full of joy, thick with emotion. Tom couldn't speak, just standing there, his eyes equally moist. He felt a rush of pride and happiness swelling in his chest. After everything, Leo had come back, reunited with his family. This moment made him believe that good things come to those who love and protect one another. Rex and Max moved closer, their faces glowing with uncontainable joy. Leo looked at them, his eyes full of understanding, like he knew deep down that this was his family. In that moment, Leo wasn't just a wild tiger, he was a part of the family. Tom and Clara exchanged a glance, their hearts overflowing with happiness. This was the moment they knew, without a doubt, that Leo had come home, not just to the house, but to the people who loved him. Tom approached Leo, gently stroking the thick fur of the tiger. "I knew you'd come back," Tom said, his voice trembling with emotion. "We never gave up on you." Clara stepped forward, resting her hand on Leo's head, gently stroking him. "We love you, Leo. You're part of this family." Leo looked at Tom and Clara, his eyes deep with connection. Nothing could change the bond they shared. From that moment on, Leo was officially back with his family, surrounded by all the love and safety he needed. Leo wasn't just the tiger they had saved. He was a special being they would protect, cherish, and love. Leo's journey had been full of challenges, but when he returned, everything felt new. His presence in the family wasn't just simple anymore. He wasn't just a wild tiger. He was a creature with powerful instincts, a unique spirit. Tom and Clara didn't just care for Leo, they learned more about him every day, understanding his natural needs, his deep emotions, and what he truly needed. Leo started blending back into the family naturally. Each day he grew closer to Rex and Max, the two dogs who had once been his companions. Every time Rex and Max played, Leo joined in. At first, his clumsiness made the moments a little awkward, but over time, Leo began to play more smoothly with them, even in simple games like fetch or rolling around together. Clara and Tom noticed the change in Leo. He wasn't as wild as before, but he hadn't lost his instincts. He still maintained the independence and strength of a tiger, but now he had become an essential part of their family. The love Leo felt for them was undisturbed by the differences between humans and animals. Every morning, Leo would head out to the garden with Rex and Max. Sometimes he'd just sit there in the sun, occasionally glancing back at the family with a look of gratitude. At night, when the family gathered together, Leo lay at Tom and Clara's feet, like a child seeking comfort in the arms of his parents. This simple scene moved Clara and Tom deeply, as they realized that despite Leo being a wild tiger, he still knew how to love and bond with his family in his own way. Feeling the need to protect and care for Leo, Clara and Tom began to plan for a larger living space for him. Clara researched safe, natural environments that would suit a tiger like Leo. They decided to build a spacious area on their property, where Leo could roam freely, but still remain safe with the family. Tom started drawing up designs and calculating the budget, making sure Leo could maintain his wild instincts while being protected. "What do you think we should do to make Leo comfortable, but still preserve his wild instincts?" Clara asked, looking at the design Tom was sketching for Leo's new living space. Tom thought for a moment, and then replied, "We'll make it spacious, enough room for him to move freely. But we also need to make sure he's not isolated. Even though he's a wild tiger, he still needs to feel the love and protection of the family." Clara nodded in agreement. "We can't let Leo become a solitary creature. He's part of this family now." Building Leo's living space was an important decision for Tom and his family. They wanted Leo to have enough room to maintain his wild instincts, but they also wanted him to feel the love and care they had for him. Leo's relationship with the family grew deeper every day, as they realized that taking care of him wasn't just about protecting him. It was about creating an environment where he could thrive. With the new plans for Leo, the family felt a fresh wave of hope. They knew their relationship with Leo would never be the same, but it was a relationship that couldn't be replaced, and they would always do everything they could to protect and keep him in the world where he belonged. The mix of pride and worry continued to follow the family as they moved forward with their plans, knowing they were providing Leo with the best life they could. Although Leo had been raised in their home for a long time, Tom and Clara understood that keeping him in their house long-term wasn't possible. The tiger needed more space, a place where he could live freely while still ensuring the family's safety. Tom and Clara knew this decision wasn't simple, but they both agreed it was the right one, to create a space that was safe and suitable for Leo's wild nature. Tom sat down at the table, beginning to sketch out a plan for Leo's new living area. "We need to build a really spacious space for Leo. He needs enough room to move, but it also has to be safe. We need to plan carefully so we not only protect him but also let him feel free." Clara turned to Tom, gripping his hand tightly. "We'll always protect Leo. That's our promise to him and to ourselves." Tom nodded, holding her hand just as firmly, his eyes still locked on Leo, filled with love and pride. "Exactly. And we'll do everything to give Leo a new life, a place where he can live freely and safely." Looking at Leo standing there among the family, Tom and Clara knew this tiger wasn't just a wild animal. It was a part of their family. And from this moment on, they would protect Leo, so he could live the life he truly deserved. However, even though Leo had become part of the family, one major challenge remained: the final decision from the authorities about whether Leo could stay with them or not. The next day, the family received a call from the Animal Protection Agency. After days of worrying, they finally met with the representatives of the agency, the ones who had been monitoring Leo's journey since he left the family. After evaluating Leo's condition and reviewing his living environment, They called for a meeting to decide whether Leo could continue living with his family. Clara looked at Tom, her eyes full of concern. "Do you think we can keep Leo?" she asked, her voice low, filled with unease. "They'll ask us to send him to the sanctuary, won't they?" Tom looked at Clara, then at Leo, who lay peacefully beside Max and Rex, his eyes shining in the sunlight. "I don't know, but Leo has been with us for so long now. He's integrated into the family, and maybe this is the only place he truly belongs." After the call, an official meeting with the authorities was scheduled. Tom, Clara, and Lena went to the Animal Protection Agency, where experts and staff from various organizations were gathered. They were all nervous, anxious, but still hopeful that the final decision would be the right one. Leo was part of their family, and they couldn't give him up easily. When the meeting started, the representative from the Animal Protection Agency explained that, by law, Leo couldn't be kept as a typical pet. However, they also couldn't deny that Leo had lived in a family environment for too long, becoming familiar with humans and other animals. They realized that sending Leo back to the wild after being raised in a family wouldn't be easy and could pose risks to both Leo and other wild creatures. Dr. Pham, one of the experts, spoke up. "Leo isn't just a wild tiger. He's a creature deeply connected to this family. If we send him to the sanctuary now, he'll face many difficulties, and he may not survive." He paused, then looked at Tom and Clara. "But allowing Leo to stay with his family will require approval from the proper authorities." After a tense discussion, the authorities decided to grant the family a special permit to keep Leo. It wasn't an easy decision, as there were differing opinions from various animal protection organizations. But with the agreement of the experts, and the fact that Leo was so familiar with the family, they concluded that keeping Leo in a safe environment was the best option for him. Sending him to the sanctuary wouldn't just affect him. It could endanger other wildlife as well. Clara and Tom felt a wave of relief upon hearing the news. Clara looked at Tom, her eyes sparkling. "We did it, didn't we? Leo gets to stay with us." Tom smiled, his heart filled with happiness. "Yes, we did what was right. Leo is part of this family, and we'll take care of him for the rest of his life." The family was overjoyed by the decision. They knew that Leo would continue to live with them, not just in safety, but also in a way that showed how love and care could transform the life of a wild animal. With this decision, Leo wouldn't have to face being sent to the sanctuary. Instead, he would live in a spacious area where he could roam freely, but still be protected and loved by Tom's family. Finally, after all the trials and worries, Leo had found a place where he truly belonged, not just as a wild tiger, but as an irreplaceable part of this family. The next day, Tom and Clara began the final stage of building Leo's living space. They looked at the final design, where Leo would have enough room to roam, but where the family's safety would always be ensured. The strong steel walls had been erected, and the lush gardens were complete. The area was designed with all the natural elements Leo needed, but it was safe enough for the family to feel secure. When the project was completed, Tom and Clara led Leo into his new space. Leo stepped in, eyes full of curiosity. His thick fur glistened in the afternoon sun, as though everything around him was new and full of promise. He walked carefully, stopping to sniff the trees, then ran around the large area. The freedom in every step Leo took made Clara and Tom feel deeply moved. They knew that this was the place Leo truly belonged. Clara stood beside Tom, watching as Leo played with Rex and Max. "We did the right thing, didn't we?" she asked, her voice trembling. Tom smiled, though his eyes were still filled with emotion. "Yes, Leo needed this space. This is where he can maintain his wild instincts, but still be protected and loved." With each passing day, Leo grew more comfortable in his new environment. He started showing his freedom in every action, but he also didn't forget the bond he shared with his family. Each morning, Leo ran around his new living space, sometimes stopping to look through the window where Tom and Clara worked. When Rex and Max ran around playing, Leo joined in, though he always kept a slight distance, as though he understood he was still a wild tiger at heart. In the early days, Leo would occasionally come closer to the family, seeking the closeness he had felt while living with them. These moments made Clara and Tom feel that they had done something incredible, that Leo had found the safety and love he needed. One afternoon, as Leo sat beneath the canopy of a tree, his bright eyes scanning the surrounding forest, Tom and Clara sat beside each other, gazing at the tiger they had come to love. Rex and Max lay by Leo's side, completing the perfect picture of family. Tom looked at Clara, his hand gently reaching for hers. "We did the right thing, didn't we?" Clara nodded, her eyes full of pride. "I know. Leo is not just a wild tiger. He's part of us. And I think he'll live an amazing life here, surrounded by the love and care we have for him." And from that moment on, Leo began his new life, a life without dangerous challenges, without the worries of not belonging. He had become an important member of the family, loved and protected. Leo's journey had come to an end, but the bond between him and Tom's family would last forever. This story wasn't just about survival, it was about love, resilience, and the determination never to give up. Leo had fought not only against nature but against himself to find the place where he truly belonged. And Tom's family had done everything possible to ensure Leo could live a life that was both safe and free, while maintaining the priceless connection between the tiger and the family. We hope this story has given you encouragement and inspiration that no matter what challenges you face, love and resilience are always powerful sources of strength. Thank you for following Leo's journey. What do you think of this story? What part of Leo's journey did you love the most? Share your thoughts with us and help us continue bringing these inspiring stories to everyone. Love and resilience are values we must cherish in life, and we hope this story has added a little more fire to your heart.